Oh, I
Hello,
completely
everyone.
forgot about that.
Yeah, it's a new one.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Gilded Flask, where adventure is never far. And today we got something special for you because we're not playing Dungeons and Dragons. We are doing a podcast, and not just any podcast. We invited the one person that we wanted to talk to for so long. It is the one and the only DM Andy. Hello, Andy.
Hello.
We are so happy to have him. And other than Andy, of course, it's me, Barry, and also Anne. Hello, Anne. Good to see you.
Hi, hello. You might know me. You might not.
Yes.
It's okay.
So not joining us tonight are Marissa and Daniel. They both had other arrangements, but hey, we're still here, so at least you get 50% of the team and Andy. So we got about 2 hours where we want to talk about everything that DM Andy does. He's a fantastic map maker. For those of you that don't know him, as we play Dungeons and Dragons, a lot of the maps that we have, about 80% of the maps that we have, are made by Andy. He's a DM himself because DM Andy. And we want to talk about all of that. So we got 2 hours for that. And I'd like to just start with a little introduction. I mean, I already introduced you, but tell us a little bit about yourself, Andy.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Barry. I appreciate that. I actually want to first say that I'm super honored to have been invited. And I'm even more flattered and humbled that you guys chose to use my work in your games, which is one of my favorite live streams. Absolutely. I'm not just blowing smoke. I love watching you guys play. The chemistry between you four is phenomenal. So but thank you so much for inviting me. Yeah, like you said, Barry, I am a DM and map maker. The DMing came first, and then I realized I needed maps for my game. But I started. I'm fairly new to D&D. And by new I mean it was about a year before the pandemic, so 2019 is when I started playing. So I only know 5e. Never played any previous editions, and I started with the Lost Mines of Phandelver. It was just between my wife and I. Yeah, we sat and played the Lost Mines. I had no idea what I was doing. She had no idea what she was doing, and we played and had a good time doing it. And then eventually brought in our friend group. So.
Wonderful. So you've actually been playing for very short, not that we've been playing much longer, mind you, but honestly, your knowledge of maps and whatnot, it's amazing how quick that can grow up. But it comes off as that you've been playing this for 20 years.
You think? Well, I mean, I've been a nerd as far as I can remember, right?
That does help.
I've always been in the fantasy world. Even growing up, it was funny because growing up, D&D was a forbidden brand in our household, because I was born in 82, right? So you figure that's very much the whole satanic panic thing. I grew up in a dominantly Christian home. So, my parents were absolutely bought into the whole no D&D, and I love them to death. But what was funny is everything else. Yeah, don't summon demons, please, in the garage. Everything else was fine. So I had fantasy board games, we played games like Hero Quest. I got into Warhammer really big for a while when I was 10 years old. My dad and I used to draw pictures from fantasy art books like Boris Vallejo, and that was great. As long as it was, I played Magic the Gathering, as long as it wasn't D&D, everything else is on the table. And of course, my video gaming, started with the Atari and it's worked its way up from there.
Oh yeah, I recognize that. I was just talking with a friend of mine the other day about the very first game that you can remember that you played, and I found this website where you can replay old DOS games, and I found this really old game from the Atari period that looked like you saw like a very pixely giraffe and then another giraffe, and you had to press 2 on your keyboard. It's that era. If you compare that to the games of today,
yeah. I remember playing the on the Commodore 64 back when I was a kid, playing it was like a dentist game where you had to clean teeth and fight cavities, and it was ridiculous, and I loved it.
Oh, incredible. I think my first console was a Game Boy, the Game Boy Color. Oh, it was so good.
Oh, the color,
chunky, the chunky one, yeah.
Yeah, that was a big thing too, because they went from that kind of greenish screen with the black, the black pixels, the kind of green background, and all of a sudden it was color, and I remember, we had computer lab in school, and we had one color Macintosh computer, with a separate floppy hard drive, and we'd all play the Oregon Trail and Sim City on it, and everyone would fight over the one color computer.
Oregon Trail, that's nasty memories, right?
yeah. I died of dysentery, so.
Yeah.
Oh. I'm really curious then, if you were kind of excluded from D&D for a very long time, what made you, prompt you in 2019 to go, okay, we're just going to try it? Like, was it a broadcast? Was it where did it start?
That's a good question, and honestly, I haven't put that much thought into it. I want to say, I think it was probably the growing popularity on the online presence from things like, obviously Critical Role streaming, although I hadn't discovered Critical Role in the beginning, so that wasn't necessarily my gateway, but it was kind of everything else. I started to catch these, what it was? I saw, it was on my just YouTube algorithm. They threw me this video with Terry Crews, and it was Celebrity D&D with Matt Mercer and Terry Crews. And I love Terry Crews. He's one of my favorite actors. And
he's a national treasure.
He's a national treasure, and he's super nerdy, and I just love him to death. And I was like, what is this? Like, Terry Crews plays Dungeons? I gotta watch this. And I didn't even know who Matt Mercer was at the time, although I'm very familiar with McCree. Never put two and two together, And so I was like, this is awesome. Like, I loved, and he was doing a World of Warcraft themed. This was when the Battle for Azeroth came out. They were doing a special World of Warcraft themed Dungeons and Dragons session, and it was incredible. It blew my mind. So then I just went down that rabbit hole, and I asked my wife, hey, would you be up for playing D&D with me? And she's a lit major, and she loves to read fantasy books, and her imagination is so wild and so different than my own. I thought that it would really resonate with her, so, and it did, and we both started playing on the kitchen table, and that was
so it was just a question. So it was just a 2-player campaign. So you DM'd and played, or was it just her as a player?
Just her as a player. I ran a couple NPCs, the pre-gens that the box set came with, just to kind of help.
You started set, right?
Yeah. It was like I did like a pre game, so it wasn't the campaign proper. I just kind of read the rules from that box, and then we were having a good time playing. And so I said, hey, let me ping my friends. We'll see if I can garner any interest. My friends, I travel in the nerd circle, so it wasn't exactly hard to convince my friends to come over for a game of D&D. I said, I don't know what I'm doing. Let's just dive in, and then the rest is history. So
it's the worst case scenario. It's fun, It's
yeah, exactly. And we've only ever had a great time. But yeah, that's so I would say, and to your question, is it really is the online presence that kind of led me to it, and it clicked once I started playing it, because I was always really huge into video games. Fantasy video games like Skyrim is still probably, I think I have like 3,000 hours logged in Skyrim, just a ridiculous amount of time. Because
have you ever done the Thomas the Tank Engine mod? With 3,000 hours.
No. But speaking of mods, the part of that 3,000 hours came from modding. And when I discovered the modding world, I'm like, it just opened up this amazing game into something that seemed infinite. And for me, D&D is a lot like that. But even better, because unlike mods, where you have conflicting mods and game crashes and all this stuff that you can and can't do, D&D doesn't have that, right? You can do anything. And as long as you can think it, you can do it. And to have that kind of, unparalleled level of imagination in a game just blew the roof off. It made video games seem pale in comparison.
Agreed. Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't want to say it, but that is so. That's so it. That's so D&D.
Yeah, and I just became hooked from. I mean, it was. I went all in.
And honestly,
it's never an easy decline. It's always a hook.
Yeah.
And it's what the magic of D&D is, right? Like I'm actually running a campaign for a couple of colleagues now. I actually got a couple of colleagues to want to play. and all of them are like, I work in IT, so they're all nerdy, but they've all of them never played Dungeons and Dragons, so this is new for them. And they were like, so it's basically just an RPG, right? I said, yeah, but it's an RPG that is literally limitless. You can do quite literally whatever you want to do. You start in a tavern. If your first thought is like, okay, let's just stab the barman, you can. You totally can. You shouldn't, but you can.
There are consequences, but I'm not going to stop you. Yeah.
And that's the fun of, like, honestly, to me, both as a DM and as a player, to me is the reason why I love D&D above everything else. It's the limitlessness. You could do everything just because you think, like, can I? Yeah, you can.
Yeah, and I 100% agree with you. It's funny that you mentioned that with your colleagues, because I also work in IT and I did the exact same thing. In the before time when we were in the office still, I grabbed 3 of my IT developer friends and said, we're going to play D&D at lunch. And none of them had played D&D, and I gave them all pre-gen characters, and we played Lost Mines, and we loved it. We hung a sign on the outside of the door with a big dragon on it that said, "Do not disturb D&D in progress." We did lunchtime D&D. It was great.
And it really is something you indoctrinate people into. When I was in secondary school, like which would be high school here, I would bring like a dice with me so that during lunchtime I'd be like, okay, we're going to do a very quick campaign. You're just going to tell me what you want to do, and I'll see if you can do it. And it's just such a slow thing, but you can really get people into it because of the limitlessness and how you can have literally nothing but the dice, and you can do something.
That's what it is. I think that's the hook, because a lot of people go into it going, okay, what are the rules? Teach me how to play. And I always, when it comes to new people, I always tell them, I'm not going to teach you the rules. Like, I'm not going to sit here and go through the rule book and talk about how to build a character and, all these. I'm like, what we're going to do is you tell me what you want to do, and I'm going to tell you what you need to roll. And that's the game. It doesn't need to be any more complex than that. Like, sure, you can get into the nuance and learning your character, but when it comes to introducing new people, a level 1 character that just swings a sword, they will eventually pick up actions and bonus actions and move, and those things will come. But I love D&D because you could take someone who's never heard of it, never played, who's never done RPGs, sit down with them and just say, tap into your imagination and tell me what you want.
Yeah, you don't want to start off with grabbing the Bible of D&D and being like, well, read this. Yeah. That will start. Doesn't work.
We're going to learn how to do character creation. Now we're going to talk about stats, and we're going to do all. It's like, we went to but before we bought that starter set, I nearly forgot. I had another friend of mine who said, hey, I'm going to a bar. There's a local bar here that's doing a D&D night for beginners. Would you like to join us? And my wife and I said, sure, that sounds super nerdy and we can drink. So that sounds like a win-win. So we went, and it was, the DM was really nice. Everybody was really great. It just wasn't our flavor because that's how it started. Okay, we're going to teach you how to build a character. And an hour and a half to 2 hours later, we're ready to play. We're like, it's been 2 hours, and I finally have my level 1 dwarf warrior, and
that about wraps it up for today.
At the table. Yeah. There was 14 people at the table, and it took forever to do anything, and we were just like, well, we're going to just drink instead. So that kind of spurred us to do, like, let's do our own thing, because I think that it can be better than this.
And, honestly, with that approach, there's also benefit to it in that, like, if you're going to start like that, if you have creativity and imagination, you can start using that from the get-go. But if you have to ease into it, this allows you to do that and discover new things as you go. What you'll get with that is players that will start off with probably a fighter or maybe something a little more difficult, but like not straying too far from the basic characters. And then the next session, like the next time they're going to play, they're going to be like, what's a warlock? And then they're going to read up on that. It's like, oh, that's actually really cool. I want to do that. Yeah. That makes people enthusiastic for Dungeons and Dragons,
Yeah, and what they do in the starter sets, what Wizards does is pretty smart. If you notice the pre-gen characters, I just bought the newest one, and I can't remember its name. The Dragons of Storm Island. I don't know.
Oh, the Dragon of Ice, Barrier Peak.
No, not that one. The one that just came out.
Oh, yeah, the one on the Beyond that they had up in the banner.
Yeah, the blue. That it's the Dragons of Storm Island or something like. I'm sure I'm butchering it, but but if you look at that one, if you look at Lost Mines of Fendelver, you'll you'll notice the character sheets are Lost Mines. I think was 2 fighters, a cleric, a wizard, and a rogue. I mean that's kind of the core. In D&D, they're not going to start someone off with a warlock, and then you have to walk someone through like, okay, first you have to pick your patron, and then you have to pick your pact later on at level, and it's just like it's a lot of information. You
want to learn what spell slots are? That's an immediate killer.
Yeah, you don't want to scare someone off of making the game too complicated. In our current Curse of Strahd campaign, we have a brand new player, and she wanted to jump in. She just wanted to go all in, but we were already level 11 at the time, and she wanted to play a druid. So she started D&D at level 11 with a druid, and it was a little overwhelming. That's
heavy.
She's actually, I think she's been doing a phenomenal, given that she just jumped in at level 11 with a druid. She's been doing great. She's the chaos that our group needed. I love it.
Because how many games do you like play per week? Like how many sessions do you run?
Not enough. I wish I could do more. Between my day job when I'm IT man and my night job when I make maps, right? That is my whole week. It's easy 100+ hours a week doing both, right? So it is a bit of a juggle. So it doesn't leave a lot of time for anything else. However, I do DM for my group. We play once every 2 weeks. In fact, we have our session tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And then I play in another Curse of Strahd campaign as a player on Fridays, and we do that weekly. So fun. I play in one game and I DM one.
So, and this is something that I've been wondering about, right? Because, using your maps, it's a treat. Every single time I get an email notification like, D-Man just posted a new thing on Patreon. I'm like, oh yeah, there's a new map. Cool, let's check it out. But that is, of course, from an outsider perspective. I'm one of your biggest fans. I really am. But the thing is, like, you make the maps yourself. How is it to play on the maps that you've created yourself? To, when you go to an area with a new map that no one has ever seen before, maybe except your patrons, and you bring your players there, and it's like, okay, so you enter this area, and I can imagine you have that little expectancy. Like, are they gonna like it? Like, how is that?
Oh, always. That's always, and it's not just with maps, right? Like that I guess you can call it imposter syndrome, right? Or it's always there. Whether I'm DMing, it's always that nagging thing in your head of, are they having fun? Like, am I just ruining this game? Or are they just being nice to me? And I don't think it matters how long you've been DMing or who you are. I think even some of the world famous DMs out there probably always will have that nagging, like, are they having fun? Do they like
It's never enough.
It's never enough. And it's the same thing with maps. It's like, God, even with my patrons, it's like, I hope I don't disappoint. I'm working on Castle Ravenloft right now, and I'm having a great time. It's one of the most challenging maps I've ever done. But there's always this, like, I hope I don't disappoint, because there's a lot of expectation out there to keep doing more and keep raising the bar, so.
Well, and especially with the level of detail that you do on your maps, because like every map that you have, like I'm not even going to be able to count the assets that you have, even on your smaller maps. There's thousands of assets that you have on there. So like, the amount of work that is going in there must be absolutely like bonkers. Like,
yeah. So I have one map. I can't remember specifically which one, but I have maps that are upwards of 10,000 assets on a single map.
Oh my God.
And I will tell you, because I use Incarnate to make my maps, and I do 100% test the Incarnate limits, and I have a pretty solid gaming rig, so I have great processing power, a good video card, but I will 100%, even Castle Ravenloft right now is, I have so many assets on the map that just moving an asset onto the page, it's super choppy and super slow, and this isn't a dig on Incarnate, it's because I've really stressed their system almost a breaking point, because I'm just like, how much detail can I add into this map before it just breaks on me?
Yeah, and that's just a creation process, of course, because then when it's done, you need to render it, and that's like when it actually needs to start creating an image of it.
My poor wife has to hear me complain about exporting maps. That's probably my least favorite part of my job. I love it. I love to make the maps, but the exporting process, especially when it renders in 8K resolution, is it can be challenging.
Yeah, you turn it on and you go make coffee. Like it's
it's like a 30-minute export for one. And I just did it was my last last Monday's map release for the Lunch Break Heroes Adventure. That came with the 4 different maps. There was over 100 total like map exports that I had to do for that map series, and it took like 2 days. Yeah, it was rough.
So
I do the variants, night, day, and rain, and all the different variants. I do all that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, which is great. Like, if you, for those of you that don't know, Andy has a Patreon, which, by the way, like, if you want to like shout that out, feel free, because
Oh yeah. God, I don't even know my own URL. Patreon.com DM_Andy.
I'll start putting it in chat for you guys, because you should definitely check it out.
Thank you. And I have a lot of free maps on there too. All the Curse of Strahd, anything that's IP restricted. I comply with the fan content creation policy. So anything Curse of Strahd, you can go on there and just get it all for free.
Yeah. And the content that he makes, it's not just a map. Indeed, as you just said, like when you download the zip folder with everything in there, it literally has night, day, rain, no rain, grid, gridless, and then the combination of those plus 8K, 4K, and lower res, I believe. It's 8.4 and lower, right?
No, I'm doing 4K and 8K right now.
Okay.
I haven't had anyone ask me for. I could do as low as like 2K. I just haven't had anyone ask me for it because it gets pretty crunchy down at those, especially with the amount of details that I add. It can get pretty crunchy at those those levels.
But yeah, still, like per map, that means that you have indeed quite a couple of maps. It's not just a image that you release. You release a whole bunch.
Right. Yeah. That's correct. What I try to do is create, like you said, rain, day and night, just a different versions of it. Now I realize a lot of I would probably say half, if not more, of my patrons use Foundry, and I know you guys use Foundry as well. I know a lot of Foundry users like to add their own night filters, their own fog, things like that. So I also, in addition to the variants, I always do what I call a clean version. So I
always use.
Yeah, exactly. I remove the baked-in fog. I try to not have lights. Though the effects, even though it makes the map look pretty, I realize from a functional standpoint that it's better, because I always try to think of the functionality of a map as a person who's used digital maps, and I know what I'm looking for. I try to also keep that in mind too.
Yeah, and I love that, because I really do see the value of bringing out the maps with rain and whatnot for, I once watched a video, I believe it was by the Dungeon Dudes, but don't hold me to it, that had like a video of, like, let's say you only have 5 minutes to prep, what do you need to do? Because we all know there are sessions where that happens, apparently. So with those 5...
that's going to be me for my game tomorrow. I'm so busy this weekend. I keep telling my wife, I've done no prep. I don't know what I'm going to do tomorrow.
Oh.
Yeah, just start off with, like, do you guys still remember what you did last week? Because I didn't. No, but, so for, if you only have a short amount of prep time and you want to, bring out something cool, what is really great is if you have a map that already shows rain and whatnot, it does save you a bit of prep time and not having to put the rain in and whatnot, because it's all steps that do add to it in Foundry. Yeah. But it's all extra prep work. You already save time by just saying, like, okay, here's the map, let's go. Right? It does save time.
I will say, I've enjoyed. We went remote. I personally use Roll20. I do want to convert. I do have a Foundry license, and I do want to start using Foundry at one point. But we're using Roll20 right now. We converted to virtual tabletop, obviously, when the pandemic hit. Mm-hmm. So we just up and said, okay, well, we still want to play D&D, so let's try to find a digital solution. I like digital. It's funny because there's pros and cons to both. I think that I love the mood that you can curate in an in-person setting. If you can dim the lights, put some candles on. It sounds like a romantic date, but no, you can really make it spooky. Yeah, you can make it spooky. I wish that I could have done the Madame Eva card reading in person, because I 100% would have worn like the thing. I would have had the crystal ball and put out the that's fun. And I don't think you could really replicate that as well, especially when it comes to role-playing a face-to-face. When you're sitting across from someone, you can see their facial expressions. You can see their visual cues when they want to speak. Yep. Over mic is a little bit more different.
Yeah, and there's, of course, the talking over each other, which in digital goes different than it goes at the table. At the table, there can be like very, very small interactions that you can't really have digitally. And you're missing out on that when you're digitally streaming it, of course.
Yeah.
However, on the plus side, of course, like,
Mhm.
music and like the digital effects that we have on virtual tabletops are unprecedented in comparison to.
Yeah, as a DM, on the like you said on the plus side, the pros of virtual DMing is that I have all the rules, the stat blocks at my fingertips. I don't have to have 6 different source books, and it's like, oh, hold on a second, flip, 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 flip. Okay, here's that monster stat block. That's his strength. Okay, there's a lot of that where I have all the stat blocks in front of me. I have the tools. Everything that I need is right there, which as a DM is super useful.
100%.
Plus digital maps. I mean, come on, digital maps are amazing.
I was going to say, like, if anyone should advocate for that. So, 2 more things that I would like to ask you about the maps themselves before I would also like to showcase a couple of them and talk about those with you.
Sure, yeah.
Is for one, you mentioned Lunch Break Heroes, which I've seen on your Patreon a couple of times. Are those specific maps that you're making for like a group of people that are specifically requesting maps? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, so if you're, are you familiar with the Lunch Break Heroes channel?
I'm not.
Have you checked out their content? So, Lunch Break Heroes, Steve, who runs the channel, has since become a good friend of mine. But when I started DMing Curse of Strahd, that was my first, big boy module outside of Lost Mines. So I started with Lost Mines. That was my first time ever DMing and ever playing D&D. And then I went straight into Curse of Strahd.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was terrifying because I'm like, this is a big boy module, right? This is the real deal. It's like, for me, it was the next step up from there is, running a homebrew campaign, which is just all you. So, here I am on the interwebs going, how do I DM Curse of Strahd? I need help. I need pointers. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. This is terrifying. Yeah. And one of the first videos that popped up on YouTube was Lunch Break Heroes. And he did a whole series on, he has this little tagline, let's grab a shovel and add some depth. So he would say, hey, here's this section of the village of Barovia. This doesn't make a lot of sense. We're going to change these things. We're going to add a bit more depth to these NPCs. We're going to give them more motives and more, because the book is great, but like any Wizards product, there's a lot that's left out. A lot of the nuance and a lot of the detail that's up to us as DMs to fill in. Yeah. And Steve's channel, Lunch Break Heroes, really helped guide that. So that's how I discovered their channel, and I since started playing. It was funny because I joined his Patreon. I was a big supporter of Lunch Break Heroes, and then he was doing a contest when Rime of the Frost Maiden came out that said, hey, send me your 1-page character backstory, and you'll be entered into a chance to play in Lunch Break Heroes Rime of the Frost Maiden.
Awesome.
And I was like, oh, wow. I always looked up to the channel, yeah. So I was like, I'll give it a shot. And I wrote my 1-page story on Maximilian Fizzlespark, my gnomish wizard. And he loved it and I won. And I've been playing D&D with Lunch Break Heroes ever since. So to answer your question, fast forward, we've kind of stayed in touch. And I've shared my maps with Steve. And, he said, these are amazing. And as his channel grew, as he finished his Curse of Strahd content, he wanted to stay in the dark fantasy realm. And so LBH has been producing original adventures created and written by Lunch Break Heroes.
Awesome.
As kind of standalone one-shots, but you can kind of string them all together if you really wanted to even do like an anthology. Almost like, like Radiant Citadel just came out and it's strung together adventures that are geared for certain character levels. Very similar to that.
It's kind of like Candlekeep Mysteries, because like Candlekeep really has that.
Yeah.
Like they are separate, but you could totally play them as one.
100%, 100%. And so he's gone down this path of creating original adventures, and he honored me and asked me to do the maps for him. So once a month a new adventure comes out, and I share them on my. So if you're a patron member of mine or of Lunch Break Heroes, either way you'll get them. Although I will say on my page I do also add in all the extra variants. As well, like you said, day, night, the WebP files, size for VTT, all that stuff. But
which, by the way, the WebP file is also such a help, because Foundry works so well with WebP files. So I'm so happy
Yeah,
that you're putting those in as well, just instead of like
when,
just standard PNG.
when I first started, I knew nothing about Foundry. I didn't even know it was a thing. And so many users were like, "What's the pixel per square?" And I'm like, I have no idea. I just make maps, like you know. And so I've had to learn all that stuff because at the end of the day, I want to service my patrons. I want to make sure that I'm creating content that they find useful. And so now what I'll do is it's like, okay, I know Foundry now. I resize my maps so they're nice, even pixel ranges. I even include a VTT sizing guide. It's like, here's your pixel range, here's your PPI, right? Your pixels per square. You just put this data into Foundry and you're good to go.
And it helps so much.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I'm glad to hear that it's helpful.
Yeah, no, it is. Okay, I open up the zip file. It's the first thing I do. Is like I look for the note files. Like, okay, keep that in the corner of my screen, and let's go.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. So the Lunch Break Hero stuff, we do it once a month, and the last adventure is a kind of Mary Shelley inspired Frankenstein-esque, adventure, and it's so much fun. I get the privilege of reading through the adventure before they're released, and I'm like, oh, I want to run this so bad. This looks really cool.
Love it.
In terms of map making, where did your love of that come from? You don't mind me asking.
No, I love that question because I've always kind of been into maps, and I don't know exactly why. I know when I was a kid, my parents used to give me like world atlases as Christmas presents because I would just thumb through and look at regional maps of Africa and like look at all these like I was just interested in maps. I loved maps. I loved nautical maps and astronomical charts and world geographical maps and especially fantasy maps. And a big thing for me is when I pick up a new fantasy book, one of my favorite things was when you first open the book, there is a map of the fantasy world. Here's the map of Westeros, right, from Game of Thrones. And I'm like, oh, cool. And I'll spend hours before I even start reading the book. I'll just start pining over the map. And it's the areas that aren't defined that I find the most interesting because it's like, I wonder what's in this marshland. They wrote the marshes of so-and-so, but what is here? What kind of people live here? What does that look like in this world? So I love maps. All my decor, when I first met my wife and she came over to my apartment, it was just wall to wall. I have all these old parchment maps hung everywhere and
it's wonderful.
Yeah, and so I've always just loved maps and that kind of when I discovered that Incarnate was a thing, it was when I first got into D&D. I was looking to make maps, even for my own notes. I wasn't even going to share them. It was just like, I want to make a map just for me as a DM so I have a reference point. And I discovered Incarnate. And I was like, wait, there's a digital map tool where I can just add assets to a page and make my own maps. I discovered that during my day job. I will be 100% transparent. All my productivity was shot. It was just like I'm on my work computer building maps. Like, look, I'm like, oh, this is dangerous. Like, I can get lost in this for hours, and I did.
I get this, like, I don't know if you were in a cubicle, like, but I just get this vivid image of you just like popping over the cubicle every once in a while, like nobody's seeing this. Great.
Yeah, exactly. Someone would come knock on my office door. Hey, are you busy? Like, yeah, I'm working on a bunch of stuff right now. I'm sorry, I can't. And I got my
there's no lie in there.
Cave map. Yeah, because it's that imagination and that journey of being able to look at a map, go, I wonder what's here, and then be like, well, wait, I could just make that. I can create what I think is there.
So is there a probably a wish, but is there a realistic wish of a homebrew? Because like to me, like I've tried my hand at a homebrew, and I'm not going to say never it's going to happen, but it's currently like on pause. It's going to happen eventually. But I've noticed for myself, like starting up a homebrew starts to me with an area map as well. And that's also the part where I was stumped. I was like, oh, this is so much to do. But with
so
you,
much.
But it is your passion. So will there ever be a D&D homebrew?
So it's a terrifying concept. We are nearly done with Curse of Strahd. We're probably a good maybe 80%. And we've been playing for, I think we're coming up on 2 years. It has been an extensive campaign. I added way too much stuff. I don't regret it, but it's just I had my players go to every single corner of Barovia because I wanted, I've heard stories like, oh, my players never went to Berez, and I'm like, Oh, that's such a bummer.
How?
What a cool
Yeah.
place to skip. And I don't want to spoil anything for the players in the chat, right? But
I'll take out my headphones.
I've heard stories of like, oh, my players never went to Argynvostholt. They just never had a reason to go there. And I'm like, that's such a cool location,
Yeah.
And that makes me sad. So in my game, not like I'm trying to railroad, but I put some pretty big, hey, you should go here, and if you don't, you're gonna miss out on some really cool stuff. So to answer your earlier question, once Curse of Strahd is done, I do plan on playing. Are you familiar with Ghostfire Gaming's Grim Hollow?
Yes. I've been I've been looking.
Yeah.
There's 2 campaigns that 3 campaigns that I'm looking at for after Curse of Strahd, and it's going to be a while because like we're 20 episodes in. They're now at Dr. Daskalus, which is a complete homebrew part. But before that, we're sort of done with Vallaki, and like so we're not even halfway. So there's a lot still to do. But I want to look forward, and I think after this, Strixhaven looks great. Grim Hollow looks great. And the third one, which I really, really want to do, but I've already watched the entire campaign on YouTube, is the one from the Dungeon Dudes.
Drakenheim.
Drakenheim. Oh,
yeah, I have that. It's in fact, I just kickstarted their most recent. I think the Kickstarter closed. It might still be open, but they just posted an expansion to Drakenheim on Kickstarter.
Yeah, the one for like Sebastian's Monster Manual or whatever. Yeah, that one, right?
Yeah. So to answer your question, will there be homebrew? Yes and no. I do plan on using the Grim Hollow campaign setting. I do look at that as homebrew because it really is just, hey, here's the world, here's a little bit of the lore, but there's still a lot that's missing when it comes to the in-depth, like what's in this city, and they'll give you a city name and that's it. The rest is beautiful. I consider that homebrew and that I have to make all that stuff up.
Agreed. Yeah.
And I'm excited and I'm terrified because it is a lot. And my brain never stops. So I am a absolute over prepper when it comes to being a DM.
Guilty.
It's bad. And I know it's a problem. And it's funny because every DM advice video you'll watch will be like, don't over prep, and I'm guilty of it. I can't help it. So I'm here trying to figure out, okay, what does the government look like? What are the ranks of the military? I need to know that. What are the tax codes in this region? What's their primary imports and exports of goods? Because I want to build this world that feels real and that has real world problems and issues. It's like, oh well, our farmers are struggling because the blight is corrupting their plots of land, and they can't sell enough to the king to make their tithing for the local church, which is being taxed heavily. And it sounds ridiculous, but for me, I feel like it really adds to the almost realism, almost the immersion of the game that I try to strive for. So
and I can imagine as a fellow DM, I can also imagine it just takes it's some ease of mind. Sure, there's a lot of work like in prep, but for the 90 times that you've prepped things like on like a level of detail that wasn't required, the 10 times that it is required, you could just be like, yeah, I have an answer for that. Just gives such an ease of mind. Because the one thing I hate when I'm DMing is that I get a question like, hey, what's that all about? And I have to think something up on the spot. Not because I can't, but because I know that's going to bite me in the ass at some point. Because it'll be a big thing later. And then I'm going to be like, I hate that I didn't consider this earlier on so I could prep for it.
You're gonna pull something out of nowhere. It becomes canon. And then all of a sudden it becomes bigger than it is. And you're like, oh boy, I think I screwed up. But like, I think I just wrote myself in.
We have a tax bracket that we can... base our like secret little messages on so that people above that will we love throwing those at you. It's great.
Like your pie business, right? It's like, well, at some point, are you going to become incorporated, right? Do you have to fill out like LLC paperwork with the Baron of Vallaki?
I was already prepping for that. Like,
Arlo would have if Casariel did not get suspicious. Kind of been like, we're just going to go back and get more, and that's fine. Don't worry.
Yeah, exactly. You're like, well, wait a minute. Well, we're selling pies at 2 gold a pop. What is the tax rate that we owe the Baron because we're selling goods and services in Vallaki, and I'm sure a portion, and this is me just spiraling, right? Okay, well, how much is the Baron paying to Strahd von Zarovich, right? He's got to pay regional taxes, and who's collecting those? This is where
the fact that he's going to pay that means that And the fact that it's going to pay that means that Strat at some point will learn of the fact that there's a new pie business going on because there's more money flowing in, which means that he will probably react to that at some point.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the DM spiral, and I think we're all guilty of it. So yes, that's my long-winded way of saying yes. There will be homebrew. I do plan on creating maps for that campaign setting. In fact, I've actually reached out to Ghostfire Gaming because I've been posting maps on their Discord. I made a parchment map of Etheris like I did for Barovia as well. That's on my Patreon. And I reached out to them, and I have a lot of respect for the Ghostfire Gaming team. I love their work. The Grim Hollow universe has now a monster manual, a campaign setting, and a player's guide. I think their writing team's amazing. They have a podcast called the Eldritch Lorecast that I watch every week. They have like Dale Kingsmill and Ben Byrne who runs it, and they have a couple. Sean Merwin, they have I think it was Sean who helped write the Tal'Dorei campaign setting. They have really good writers on their staff. Their Fables adventures that are out. So I like what they do, and I reached out to them and said, hey, I want to start making maps for Fables, and I'd like to make maps for Grim Hollow. I'll make them free to the public, like Wizards fan content policy, if you guys are okay with the work. So we can look forward to that in the future.
And any response to that just yet, or is it in the works?
Oh, it's in the works, yeah, but they're okay with it because I want to be courteous when I use someone else's IP. Obviously, I don't want to use someone's IP and creativity and be like, "Hey, I made a map. This is a thing that I created." And while it is like I made the map, I want to acknowledge that hey,
it is still my creative property. Yeah, it's a gray area, but I get you. Yeah,
it is a bit of a gray area, and I want to give respect to obviously the pioneers who paved that road, who wrote the content, created. Like Mike, I think it's Mike Schley, I'm probably butchering his last name, but he's the cartographer who did the maps, a lot of the maps in the Curse of Strahd book, so I don't want to be like, here's my map of Barovia. It's like my rendition or my iteration of it, but it's, Mike's obviously was the original cartographer on that map, so I want to make sure to give him some love too, so.
Well, of course. But I think, and that is something that definitely can be said, is that the maps that are in the Book of the Curse of Strahd, I mean, they're good, but they were also made, of course, with a different setting, if you will, in mind. Your maps are digital, and they are made for a digital environment. And while you can totally print them out and put them on the table, which I can imagine, like I don't know if everyone has ever done that, but you totally can.
Yeah,
with the ones
I have.
That make.
I have a few of my patrons who have sent me pictures. They've gone to like print shops and they've got my maps. I had one patron did his last final battle, at. I don't want to spoil it for Anne. At a temple.
An undisclosed.
At a temple somewhere in Barovia, and he printed it out. They showed me pictures. It was amazing,
I can imagine, and that does work on the table. But of course, your maps are digital. The ones that were originally made for the Curse of Strahd, they can still be used digitally. Like you can totally import them and use them. But I don't know why, but it feels off to use the ones that are in the book in a digital setting. I don't know what it is, but I'm missing something there.
I think for me, it's a mood. Because when I made my maps for Barovia, I really wanted to capture the gloomy, overcast mist. Mist is always prevalent there. It's always a thing. We're just it's in the mist, right? So I think that the maps in the Curse of Strahd module, while they're amazing, they are very bright and they're very cheery.
Peppy. Yeah.
And they're very it's like it looks nice, and it shouldn't look nice. It should look run down. It should look oppressed. This is Barovia. Like the village of Barovia is one of the most depressed villages that you'll go into, and the people there are living literally under the shadow of Castle Ravenloft. And if that isn't a statement, I don't know what is. Then you look at the map in the book, you're like, oh, this looks like a nice little hamlet to visit.
Yeah, because I believe, and I'm not 100% sure, but I believe the map maker for Strahd was the same one that made the ones for Lost Mine of Phandelver and the Dragon of Ice RIP, because they have the same color scheme, the same kind of design style.
Yeah.
And for the Dragon of Icebreak Peak and the Lost Mine of Phandelver, it works beautifully. It's outside, it's on the Sword
Perfect.
Coast. Works, right?
Yeah.
Crystal Strat, like the sun doesn't shine there. So,
Yeah.
the color scheme is way off.
Yeah, and you see that in the details that I add to my maps. Like some things that always kind of bug me are like when you see Barovia, for instance, it is raining constantly. And we were chatting about the weather, right? Where you come from, and if you look at any rooftop in an area that's always damp and moist and wet with rain, you're going to see that on the roof. You're going to see the lines of grime and dirt and moss that begins collecting on the stone. And I've never liked it when I just put a couple roof tiles down and it's just clean. I like to grime it up.
Yeah.
And like, I will say, as someone who comes from a place that is so predominantly raining, the gray, it is so gray all the time. Everything does look a little like dead when it is raining that amount, when it is overcast, when there is no sun, and that's like perfectly captured in the maps.
Oh,
like
thank
that
you.
is the vibe. It is.
Yeah, that's what I was trying, but I love that you said that, because that's obviously what I try to do, whether or not that comes across. So that makes me happy. Thank you. But yeah, like you said, that with the gray, it's almost like muting the colors, and that's something that I really wanted to capture in Barovia was I wanted each map to feel like you're in this land that's muted almost. The sun shines, but not really, right? It's not utter darkness. It's just this. I think the module even says the sun is there, but it's like this dim echo of what it should be. And so when you look at a map, I want you to feel that in the map.
Yeah, you want to almost get the feeling that you need to rule everything as dim light, even though you shouldn't. But it's that feeling, and that's exactly your maps do showcase that. The great thing about that as well, and like we'll see when we start looking at your maps, there are a couple of places where you do use a lot of color, and because of the fact that everything else is so gloomy and dreary, when you look at the things that do have color, they pop out, and they pop out for a reason, because they have color for a reason, right? Like Vistani, for example, like they have color. And they pop out so much more because they're just about the only thing that have color in the rest of the world.
I love the Vistani. Sorry, Anne, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to compliment as well, whenever we're in the dream sequences for Strahd, like, it feels like a completely different land, even though you might recognize like maybe some of the places. It's crazy.
You're right. The whole the interactive Thomas Strahd sequence, the dream sequence, it feels wrong to do a map of Barovia, I'll call it pre the darkness, right? Yeah. And I'm like, God, this map feels so bright and cheery, but I'm like, no, that it's supposed to be like that. That's
what it was. Yeah,
that's what it was. And I wanted to show that contrast of what it was versus what it is now.
Yeah.
And like you said, Barry, the Vistani, I have a special place in my heart. I love the Vistani. I've always been a big, I'm not going to say I know a lot about like the Romani culture, the real world Romani culture, but I love the beauty in the Vardos, the wagons. There are so many beautiful, like if you just Google Vardos and you look at these real world beautiful wagons that have been decorated with flowers and vibrant purple paint, and they are, even the craftsmanship of the wood and the little details. My dad was a carpenter, so I appreciate good little woodworking details, and it's just gorgeous. And I wanted the Vistani to be the stark contrast of what Barovia is. It's dark, it's damp, it's dreary, it's full of mist, the red eyes of the wolves lurking at every single dark corner of the woods, and then you see this encampment with vibrant violin music and accordion music, and these Vardos, the wagons that have floral decor, and these people that are jovial and brightly and ostentatiously dressed, and I love that contrast.
Exactly. The ones that they spark at least a little bit of joy. They're, at the very least, they're trying to make the best of a bad situation, but they're actually not having that bad of a time. And again, the maps are your basis, and when the map already shows that like the camp itself isn't that much of a bad place to be, and your maps really do showcase that, just even through the use of color, it adds to the vibe it's so easy for me to paint the picture, to have the map underneath and be like, well, this is a camp, and it's lively, and it is because there's color.
Yeah, and as I've because as you've started the campaign, you are still kind of using some of my older maps, and I've been doing I'm well past the 1.5 year mark, I think, that I've been doing Curse of Strahd maps. And when I look at my earlier maps, it's not that I'm ashamed of them necessarily, but I'm just like, oof, like I could do way better versus what I'm doing now. So I think you guys are going to see that progress, especially you, Anne. When you see the maps, you're going to, if you recall some of my earlier maps versus like some of the stuff I'm putting out now, like any skill, you're just going to get better at it over a 1.5 year time.
I mean, obviously,
So
I've seen,
that.
I've seen your maps for Argent Vosthold. That, like, at some point they're going to go to. They're
So
part
excited.
of the new set, and when I saw them the first time, I can see that you're using new techniques and methods. I can see that through a couple of things that you've done on the map. It's different, and honestly, your older maps are still amazing quality. But I do understand what you're saying is that you're growing, of course. And you can definitely see the new maps are just works of art.
I am immensely proud of Argent Vosthold. Like, that map took me forever, and the exporting nearly killed my soul. But I'm immensely proud. Hopefully this doesn't spoil anything, but there's a part in the map where I did a floor-tiled dragon mosaic, and that took forever because I literally, I placed each tile individually. I did an outline of the dragon, and then I tiled it. Yeah, no, I tiled it individually because that asset doesn't exist, and I wanted that to be there. So, and
it's big. Like that's like a quarter map. Like,
yeah.
I will make sure Carla explores every inch of Argent Vosthold.
Oh yeah, she will. I know. I feel like Carla would be all over that place.
Oh yeah. Spooky ghost
house.
Has
total Carla vibes. Yeah.
Hell yeah.
All right, so if you're okay with it, I'd like to bring you to our other screen to have a look at a couple of your maps. I took 5 of the ones that like we've been through already, and I just want to have your perspective, like your creative process on it. Anything that you want to share on it, because it's just so fun to like see the maps again, but then through your eyes.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. All right, let me bring us over. Here we are again. And you were just saying, like, you're very proud of like your new maps, of course, and like your old maps. When you look back on them, you're like, I'm better now. Having that said, we're still going to start with, I believe, your very first map for Curse of Strahd, but do correct me if I'm wrong, which should be this one. It is the entry map to the Gates of Barovia. I scrolled on your Patreon. I scrolled all the way down to find your very first map that you've ever uploaded, and I believe that it was this one. So
that is one of my earliest. I don't know if it was my. Yeah, that was either my first or second. I think I did maybe just a generic forest, and then I did this map. But yeah, it's like one of the first that I ever did.
Yeah.
Not in general. I've done incarnate maps before, and my earlier work, like when I was just learning, is not out in the public because I would not post that because I'm like, not great. But this was the first map that I felt comfortable kind of putting out there.
So, like, with a map like this, right? Like, obviously, like, you can see the crazy amount of detail, but like compared to maps with a lot of buildings and whatnot, this is ultimately, and I don't want to like diminish it in any way, but it is just trees and rocks, right? How much time does this cost to make this?
So the outdoor, I will say the outdoor maps take significantly less time to do than the building maps, which take probably about 10 times longer, which was again why Argent Vosthold was such a beast, because I had both. I extended out the exterior to include the surrounding forests as well as doing the interior. So I don't recall. This map maybe took me 2 days, maybe about 16-ish hours, which for me is, a small amount of time compared to some of my most recent. I think I'm on week 2 right now of Castle Ravenloft exterior. Of putting in probably like 6 to 8 hours a day. Yeah.
And that's just the exterior, right?
That's just the exterior,
Yeah.
It doesn't help
the
that
castle is
Yeah, it doesn't help. Like I mentioned before, that I've reached like I think Incarnate's technical limits. Where now every time I place an object, it's just it's like when a game lags really bad, you could see the things just kind of boop, boop, boop across the screen. I'm like, oh boy, this is gonna take me a while. But yeah, I look at a map. What I try, so when you asked earlier about my creative process, I try to add depth, which can surprisingly be difficult on a top-down perspective battle map. It's a little challenging to try to add that feeling of depth. And obviously, if you go to the woods, it's going to be rare that you just have a flat trail, where there's not elevation and boulders. So I try to look at a lot of reference pictures as kind of the first thing that I do when I make a map. It's, hey, all right, I'm doing a forest. Well, let's just start looking at forest pictures. Let's see how underground, the undergrowth grows. Let's see what different types of plants they're going to be in pine forest. And even the trees now that you see on here, these are just the base pine tree assets. I do make a lot of color changes because not every single tree is going to be a uniform color. If you look outside, if you see 10 trees, you're going to see 10 different colors, even if they're just slight variations of green. So I went through and kind of individually changed the color of every single tree so there'd be just a slight difference, which I think adds to it. But even now, my pine trees that I make now are groups of trees. I'll stack 3 pine trees. In between those stacks, I put the barren trees so I can have more spindly branches coming out. So now a single pine tree on my newer maps probably are groups of about 10 to 12 different assets that make up one tree.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
So, I was correct to say that this was your first map on Patreon as well, right? Like, was this the one that started it?
Yeah, actually not this one. There was a Misty Forest map that has the same similar vibes, minus the gate. Yeah. And I made that for my own Curse of Strahd game. And, I was like, oh, well, I'm on the Reddit Curse of Strahd community all the time. I've used resources there from Dragna Carta and Mandy Mod and big contributors that have contributed. So I said, well, you know what? I've used a lot of stuff on here. Let me contribute back to the community. So I started posting my maps. I didn't think anyone would. It was just another map, right? I didn't think it'd be a big thing. And people seem to really love them. I got a lot of really positive comments and a lot of good upvotes, and people were like, oh, this is amazing. And it kind of inspired me to be like, well, if people like my work, maybe I'll just do the whole module, because there's a lot of areas in the module that don't have maps.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where I started, was like, you know what? I'm going to do maps for areas that don't have maps, like the village of Barovia. There's a lot of locations there, and for some reason, there's a map of the whole village, but there's not like a good virtual tabletop battle map.
No, it's
there's
just
no build draft.
It's just the little like city map with the A, B, C, like what's where, which is great, but you can't really play on that.
Exactly. Like there is a church map, but there's no Burgomaster's mansion. There's no Mad Mary's home. There's no Blood on the Vine Tavern, right? There's no Bildrass Mercantile. So those locations needed to be mapped, and that's kind of where I started. Was, hey, I'm going to make a map for an area that doesn't have a map.
I see Anne like moving off like a quick note. You don't know Mad Mary, do you?
Interesting.
Which it's not a spoiler because like it's a very minor thing, of course, but like you've never run into that. Yeah, so that's.
I'm going to make it the biggest thing when I do. I'm gonna be like, she is the key to Barovia.
I hope I'm not spoiling too much.
No.
I will forget this tomorrow. Do not worry.
Don't you worry.
My wife says the same thing. I'll slip up because she helps me with my social media marketing, and I always tell her like, you didn't see this, like you don't know that this exists, and I love her to death, but she'll be like, I won't remember this tomorrow, and she won't, and it's great.
Fabulous. Because
I could spoil stuff, and then when we're in session, she'll be like, oh yeah, I completely forgot that this was even a thing.
All right. So next up is by stark contrast, but not that far away from this map. This one is, honestly, like almost all of your maps are like, fighting for tier 1, tier 2 favorite map. because all of them just have so much detail in it. But this one just deserves special recommendation, which is why I wanted to showcase it and talk with you about it, because this was one of the, as a matter of fact, I believe this was the map that I got to know your maps on. I was prepping for Curse of Strahd, and I was looking for maps, and I started out with Beneos battle maps. And I don't know if you know Beneos, but like he makes like 3D renditions of maps.
Yeah,
and they're absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, he's an amazing artist.
Yeah, he is. The only trouble was he was also in the process of still making maps, and where he was at the time was not sufficient for me for prepping the campaign. So I couldn't use his maps, so I was like, okay, so I need something else. Plus, they're all 3D, and at first I thought 3D was great, but ultimately I would like to have 2D maps. So I started just looking through the Reddit, like I need something, and I've scrolled past this map, and I was like, hang on a minute, like that looks really pretty. So this was my very first map that I saw from you with your the work that you did, and what caught my eye on this is as we said earlier, the insane amount of detail that is on this map. Specifically because it's not just a building, but this is like the center of the village of Barovia, and there's like, I didn't count them, but there's like 15 buildings somewhere that like all have stuff in there. There's so much here. So again, like my question, how do you start with a map like this? Like,
so this is probably, I think it still remains to be one of my most popular maps, which is also one that I'm very much looking forward to redoing. Much like the first map that you showed, the Gates of Barovia. When I'm done with Castle Ravenloft, because that is the last location. That is the last core location. I've mapped out everything else in the Curse of Strahd book, 100%, outside of things like generic locations and third-party content that have been added. But the core locations, I have maps for all of it outside of Ravenloft. So when I'm done there, I do want to come back and redo these maps, because I think that now I can take the same map and make it better. But as far as where to start, again, this came from, hey, players need an interior location for the Blood of the Vine Tavern.
Yeah,
they need one for the Bildrass Mercantile, because you're going to go to the tavern and you're going to go to the shop. Like, that's just, as a DM, we just know these things.
Yeah.
And the book also mentioned, what caught my eye was half, I think it said something like half, if not more, of the homes in the village of Barovia are abandoned. And, whether or not Barry uses this, as a DM, the book will tell you when a player enters into a building, roll on this table to see what that building has. It could be a couple of villagers hanging out, wondering why a stranger has just come into their home. It could be some giant rats, or it could be some zombies. And and Barry, I don't know if you ran zombies in the town. But
well, I didn't have to, but the thing was, when I was prepping for that, I also read that, and I was like, I was looking at other maps as well before I saw this one, and I instantly was like, okay, this is going to be the one. I like my creative freedom as a DM, but with a map like this size, it so helps to have a couple of houses pre-designed. Like the ones where the light is on are the ones that is going to have villagers, and the ones that don't have the light on are the ones that probably going to have zombies. It makes my work so much easier, and it paints a picture.
Yeah, I don't really like rolling random dice tables in session, because I feel like as a DM it kind of breaks that immersion. All of a sudden it takes me out of the world and puts it into a game, and I don't want it to be a game, right? I want it to be more immersive. I do want it to be a game. That was, but I want the immersion to be there. So when I can describe, the muddy streets of Barovia, and my players are going to ask, well, what do we see? Well, you only see smoke coming out of a handful of chimneys. Most buildings appear to be boarded up with rotted and water-soaked wood. Completely dark on the interior. As you walk past a building, you smell a foul odor coming from inside. And that really helps to paint the picture. And so when you have a map like this, I went through and said, okay, well, if 3/4 of the building are abandoned, I'm just going to make the abandoned buildings on here. Like you said, as a DM, you'll know exactly what's where and what players will see when they walk into them.
Yes. and another detail that I, because it's the details, right? But another thing that another group that I've been playing with instantly like saw, were like, wow, like, you know, that shows how much effort and love went into this map. It's the tracks on the ground. Like, you could have like left those out and it would still be a great map. But it's details like that where you just see like the cart tracks and whatnot. It makes it borderline come alive as a map.
Yeah, you know that the Vistani travel through this village. You know that, you know, Granny's got to have her cart of pies through here as well. So there's going to be cart tracks. I mean, the villagers still have to work. One map that I did, I think before this one, was the outskirts of Barovia, where I included some of like the farmland that are on the outside, right? So you know that villagers have to work. They have to pay their lord's taxes one way or another. They have to still provide food. They're not just sitting in a depressed home by themselves doing nothing. You know, they're going to have to work. So those are details that I think about. Well, it's muddy. It's not paved roads. There's going to be deep cart tracks going in various directions. You know, at one point, the Wizard of Wines would have had to make wine deliveries to the Blood of the Vine Tavern, right? Well, there's a cart that comes through.
Even though that cart is currently not running anymore. Who knows why, right, Ed?
I don't know. I have no idea what's up with the winery.
But nothing's wrong. We're going to go there and we're totally going to get champagne and it'll be fine.
Yeah,
champagne do a stomp. My player's still looking for a bottle of that. Yep.
Yeah.
As a player, when encountering these maps, they are... this one stands out as well. Like, I completely get what Barry's talking about, even though I obviously didn't see this full picture. But I remember the tavern so vividly because the second, like, just the detail of you adding, like, a trunk at the end of the bed, because obviously people will need to put their clothes or their belongings somewhere, immediately offered such a huge opportunity for, like, role play, for a little joke, for entertainment of being like, well, Carla's obviously going to take that as her bed because there's only one bed in this room. And it's so, every single detail is so incredible, and it's genuinely a joy to walk through it, and you can feel that life as you're talking about it. Like,
that means a lot as well, because 100% I try to think about my goal for map making has and always will be adding that level of detail and making the map feel alive and feel lived in. I want you, like you said, and you know, when you walk into a room, I want to think about, okay, well, here's a room in an inn. What goes in a room in an inn? Well, it's probably cold here, so there's going to be some fur on the sheets, right? There's going to be some warmth that you need to capture. A couple end tables, so you can put a jug of water, right? Maybe a wardrobe, maybe, right? Like you said, a trunk at the end. Maybe some bigger rooms might have a writing desk, right? Who's visiting this inn? What types of people stay here? I think about all of that stuff. Like, how does the logistics work? Do they have a kitchen? Well, if they make food, they have to have a kitchen. Does that kitchen have a back door where they can load and unload cargo, right? I try to think of like all those little details when making maps.
Yeah, and it shows. Plus, like when you know that like the map is helping with the immersion, was when I remember when Marissa and John, I believe it was Marissa and John, when they were in Bildrath, in Bildrath Mercantile at some point, or it was you, Anne. I can't remember actually, but it was one of you three.
Trying to steal something?
It was the grappling hook.
Yeah, that was me.
You were like, is that actually there? And like, I didn't even see it.
That's actually a grappling hook.
Yeah, and I was like,
it was the grappling hook. I remember that episode where they were trying to buy the grappling hook, and you, Barry, were like, I remember your words, because you're like, I realized there's a grappling hook on the map that's not actually in the shop, because I didn't want to, you know, he's not selling that particular item.
But the fact that it's there and like that level of detail, like being added into your story, like, hey, can we use that? Because there's other instances later on in other maps where I totally let that happen because I wouldn't have thought of that, but it's there, and sure, go ahead. Like, it's fun. You know, that shows that it's a good map.
Even the and I hope this isn't a spoiler, but even the Bildrath, if you look in the storage room behind his main counter, it has a little tiny cot on the floor with a singular candle for his nephew to sleep in.
I saw.
You know, if you run him like he is in a module, he's kind of a dick.
Yeah, he is.
And not very nice to his nephew. So I liked the idea of like, well, I gotta put up my nephew somewhere. So you know what? I'll just throw a cot on the floor, and you could sleep in the storage room.
I don't know. And did you like? Can you piece together who like his nephew is? Because you have met him. just not in the
Met
shop.
him.
Yeah, you met him in the bar. He was coming to drop something off over there.
Oh, ooh. Okay, I'm going to be trolling. I'm already trolling to our like VODs, but that's going to be my little mission now for this week.
Yep.
Figure it out.
Yeah, I had him waiting in the back room because like this is early on in Curse of Strahd, and like before Curse of Strahd, we played the Dragon of Icespire Peak together. We recorded that, but we didn't do it on Twitch. So that's sort of like a bonus release we're going to do as we hit like an X amount of followers. We're just going to throw it all on YouTube. That was our getting to know campaign to see like, are we compatible as players and DM? And obviously, well, you know, here we are.
Too compatible.
So that worked. But this was the start of Curse of Strahd, right? New campaign and all that. So I don't know how they're going to play. And the great thing about Curse of Strahd, and like you can imagine as map maker, there are so many locations where some players want to explore everything. They want to see everything. They want to open up every room, which is great, you know. But my players, like Anne and Daniel and Marissa, they really have that sense of like, you know, sometimes like, you know, if you go to an inn, you don't go to the private quarters of the owner of the inn unless you have a good reason to. And there's something to be said for that. So I didn't know that back here. So that nephew was in the back room waiting for you guys to open the door. And you didn't. And I was like, I still want you guys to see him.
Peak, we were so nosy. We were in every house being like, hi, who's here? Hi, hello. But what we kind of, I think when we're playing, we kind of think of like, someone is watching us and we don't want them to be, well, we want to sit there and be like, okay, what's in that corner? What's in that corner? Is any of this going to help us in the main battle? Like trying to min-max a little bit in terms of D&D exploration. We set that aside for what is naturally flowing. What will my character want to do? You know, I want to go in there when my character does want to.
I love that about Carla, right? And not just your character, but the whole group in general. You guys are very respectful of the people of Barovia. You realize that you're in a foreign land. You do your best to follow the rules and laws and customs of this land. You're not just barging into random houses going, hey, do you have anything we could take? It's not Skyrim where I can just walk into a home and take stuff and the poor guy is just sitting there looking at me and I'm like, hey, sorry man, I got an adventure. You know, this is the tax, right? And you guys do a really good job of doing that, of kind of showing that respect. To the people there. In fact, I think it was the last, I want to say the last or the one before that. I remember Carla being so concerned in the dream sequence when you guys had to kill, it was like one of the knights of the Silver Dragon. And she was so like, did we just murder someone? And I remember she was really distraught about the idea
especially
of like,
when we
murdering
found him again. And it's like, you can physically see like, okay, this has, did we do this a little bit to an overpoint? Because theoretically, we should be able to walk into any of those abandoned buildings and be like, this is ours. But I messaged Barry earlier this week being like, how much does a house cost in Barovia?
Yeah, we're working on that, but they're probably going to be property owners at some point.
And you have to pay taxes to the Lord of Barovia, well, to the Burgomaster. Yeah. And pays taxes to the Lord of Barovia, so that'll be fun.
Do we have to take out a mortgage? Like, do we need proof of like employment? I don't know.
I've seen that player respect like with another party, like, you know, and by contrast, and I'll forgive them for it because they're new. But like my colleagues, right, like the colleague party that I'm running, they've only just started out, and they've just now come to the part where they help out with the burial, right, in the church with the father of what's his name again?
Irina.
Irina, but like her brother. It's,
Father Donovich or Ismark.
Ismark, thank you. In both this campaign and in their campaign, I killed off Ismark. Like I'd like to do that like at the start. He's an important character, but it's such a like a defining moment. Like holy shit!
My jaw dropped when you ran that scene.
Really?
I did not expect it. I was watching. I'm like, okay, yeah, I know the funeral, and I know, and it's so funny because for a lot of players, that's their first introduction to Strahd, or at least some vestige of Strahd. In the game that I play with Lunchbreak Heroes, you know, he didn't have Strahd show up. He had Rahadin, but because we were taking Irina with us, Rahadin said, well, my lord needs to test you to make sure that you can keep her safe. And he just sent a pack of wolves on us at the graveyard. It was brutal. And But what you did with Ismark, I was just like, watching, and I almost had to be like, wait, did he just do that? Like, no, there's got to be something. He didn't just kill out Bismarck. Like, and no, he did, and that was amazing, and I love that.
So I did
I was
that.
shocked.
Yeah.
I did that with the group with my colleagues as well, and by contrast, like, because Anne, Daniel, Marissa, they were like in shock as well, like what what the hell, right? With my colleagues, one of them is a bard that has like very like roguelike, everything that glitters is great kind of effect. So Ismark was like killed and cast aside, and like Strahd moved on his merry way. And I said, so what do you guys want to do now? And he was like, so I'm gonna rush over to like check him out. I said, okay, so that's a medicine check or whatnot. I said, okay, so how much money does he have on him? He just robbed him then and there.
Wow.
He hasn't even cooled off
His
yet.
sister's still standing there, bro.
Yeah, with his
my
sister
God.
in the same graveyard that you just buried his father. Like, that's brutal.
Yeah, so it takes all kinds, right? It's
Yeah, and that's
Did
the
they
thing is,
manage to find the vampire in the basement, though? That's the question.
yeah, as a DM, you facilitate. You're just like, okay, we could be taken aback sometimes, but you're like, I'm not going to stop you. You can absolutely search his dead and probably still warm body, which is terrifying. As his sister watches in horror.
It's Dungeons and Dragons. You can do whatever you want,
Yeah, but there are consequences. Like, I think if that were to happen with me, Irina would absolutely not go with that person. She would not be okay with that.
He rolled a 19 on this sleight of hand, so I was like, okay, you can do that without her noticing. But I was like, anything below a 17, you're effed. Like he's gonna notice.
Checking the body, and he's meanwhile swiped the coin purse, and no one noticed. That's great. It's terrifying, but great.
Yeah. So next up, another one of my favorite. Like, again, as I said, like I can basically say this for every map. Like, one of my favorites, but this one obviously holds a very special place. It is the windmill map. And I love this one for like a multitude of reasons. Of course, what we did, the whole play and whatnot. But what I loved about this is their first visit was just on the ground floor. And the ground floor itself is an amazing map. But the way you constructed this map, what I love is the fact that you've put those other levels in a black bar to the side, which allowed me to hide it. So they didn't even know that part of the map was there until we needed it. And I especially remember John, like Daniel, reacted to that so vividly, like, oh, there's more.
Yeah, and you know what's it's interesting because there's a few different ways to handle multi-levels, and if you look at my more recent maps, I don't do the black bar anymore. I just make the whole map as its own level, so that way you can either so I have more familiarity with Roll20, but one of the tricks and tips I've learned for the Roll20 DMs out there is you can create. Are you familiar at all with Roll20, Barry?
I am, yes. Before I started DMing, I played 2 campaigns on there. Well, 1.5 campaign. So yeah, I know as a player.
So have you ever? As a player. So in Roll20, you can create a multi-sided token. Which is really useful for things like a werewolf who can change into human form, werewolf hybrid form, and wolf form, right? You can actually create a multi-sided token, so you can just switch the token image. Well, you can do the same thing with maps. You can create a multi-sided quote-unquote token, but for maps, right? So if you have a 3-story building, you can put all 3 maps into a multi-sided token, so when you're on the map layer, you can just switch to the level that you need.
Yeah.
And that's so I try to make my maps correspond with that. Same thing with Boundary, and I realize there's other modules like the levels module that makes it really easy for you to be able to click and go to different levels. The only thing I wish, and if anyone from Incarnate is listening, I hope, fingers crossed, that you guys can make an addendum to your policy. I used to create different levels and floors as PNG files to make it easy for you to just stack them. But I was told by Incarnate that is not allowed, and they were like, nope, you can't do that. It's against our terms and conditions. So I had to take them all down, which is always such a bummer for me because I get asked that all the time. Hey, can I get a PNG for this roof? Or, hey, the Vistani wagon, can I get just the wagon asset by itself as a token? And I used to be able to do that, but
so is that disallowed because as it stands, it's just an art item and therefore it's copyrighted because it's not like.
Yeah, it's in their terms and conditions as distribution of their assets. Even though, like for me, a Vistani wagon, a Vardo might be 100 to 200 different assets that I created. So in all respect, it's not like I've just taken one of their base assets, cut it out in Photoshop and went, here you go. Here's a token for you to use.
That was your rendition.
Obviously, yeah, it's my rendition. So I hope that, and I get it. Like I 100% respect it, and I get what they're trying to protect their artists' work from being distributed freely on the internet. 100% agree, but I hope that they can almost modernize that terms and conditions, that maybe with a stipulation or a definition that says, well, okay, if it's a floor or if it's a token that has more than 100 plus assets that you've kind of created, then you can distribute that. Because, and again, I'm not trying to do anything nefarious. Obviously, I want to respect the artist, but from a practical standpoint, I want to be able to provide additional tools and services for DMs to make it. So we'll see.
So another thing I really loved about this map, and it's one of the reasons why I wanted to showcase it, is again, like level of detail is amazing on this map because everything is here that I would want that I would want there. But the great thing is at the top of the map, which is if you look at the three like levels on the side, it's the highest one. You see those like glowy lights, and those glowy lights correspond with something that isn't in the original story. That is a homebrew part. That's the little flasks, right? So it is incorporated in your map, and it is done, I think, rather tastefully in that, like, if you're not running that particular part of homebrew, you don't have to see it as such. But I immediately recognized it. I was like, hey. So I was wondering, because this is one of the maps that I got through Pyram King, who like prepped the map and like did everything.
Oh yeah, includes it with this module. Yeah. So was that the reason why you added it in, or was that just something that you wanted to have in there because you were running it this way? No, so what I tried to do, I added a lot of third-party content creators, and unfortunately, this is before Pyram and I partnered together to do maps. I ran a lot of Dragna stuff, and I also ran a lot of Mandymod stuff, which, if you're familiar with both of those creators, they do amazing work. And I believe that the top level had some changes that Dragna had mentioned. So what I try to do when I make my maps is I go through like Lunch Break Heroes, Pyram King, Dragna, Mandymod, and I want to see what other third-party content creators have altered or changed. Hopefully this isn't a spoiler, but the Abbey, I did one version that's by the book and one version that Lunch Break Heroes made a change to. So I actually have two different versions depending on who you might be running. I try to think about what some of the major content creators out there and what changes they've added, and I try to incorporate those changes in my map so there's more versatility for a DM.
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely love this map. I mean, vivid memories for this, of course, with the party.
Yeah. See, even looking at this now, I'm like looking at the little details. Like, okay, I can do the floorboards better. I can add more depth and shadows there. I'm like, I have the depth of field now, so I can actually stack them and add varying layers of depth of field. So when you're on the top level and you're looking out of the window, everything on the ground level would be blurred to show height. I could do shadows way better now, and I'm like,
It's never done.
I can't,
right?
I can't wait to redo. Like, I'm happy with this map. I like how I did it, but I still want to redo it with what I can do now. I still think I could do a better a version of this.
Anything you want to add in on this, Anne?
I loved this, and I do like the convenience of having it all there together, specifically for the battle portion. As a player, like, it made things so much easier to like drag it up, and because it's so fun and because there's a lot there, I feel like it when you are fighting them, I know that traditionally maybe for a lot of parties you don't fight them, or when you do go back to fight them, maybe it's a little more of a trickier situation. The point that we did it was a little bit ridiculous. I don't know how standard that is. But like the fact that there was the bone grinder up there, like one of the things that I was thinking about if it had gone well is trying to lead them up there to maybe stick their head in, because I can vividly see it. Like, oh, wow. I remember a lot of that kind of stuff, that when I'm fighting with your maps, I am looking at the environment. I am being like, can we incorporate the environment a little bit? Because that's fun. Especially because I'm very much like, I don't want to use a spell slot if I don't have to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And even
So
it's funny because even the naming, you mentioned Bone Grinder, and that's how it's named in the module. The old Bone Grinder. And there's some names where I'm like, guys, what are you doing? You're killing me as a DM. Like, I am not going to tell my players. Like, I'm trying to role play this sweet little grandma, and they're like, where do you live? And she's like, I live in the old Bone Grinder. And you're like, huh. That sounds weird for a name.
Yeah,
Same thing with like Death House, right?
Yeah,
Like,
I made that.
I'm not
I made
calling
that
it
mistake
Death
with
House.
this party. I made that mistake with this party. Like I
And it was
accidentally slipped
such
up
a
and called
small
it.
slip.
Yeah, I called it Bone Grinder.
Because
Yep.
you were
because
so
it's-
good
catch
at
that.
that deed to it. And it was like the old Durst windmill, and that's what we were thinking of it as. And then that one slip up, and we were like, oh,
Hang on.
okay.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, like Rose and Thorn, like, oh, where do you live? Like, we live in Death House. Like, that's weird.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like,
Oh, yeah,
I
the-
called it the Durst
weirdo.
Manor. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the environment really helped here because like the second approach, I loved like the creativity in that as well, where Anne just used invisibility and went through the side, like through a window, which was just that it was just absolutely perfect because that was a very smart. Like ultimately, it didn't really matter, but but the approach was great.
It was.
Yeah.
I remember coming out of that feeling defeated, but also the next day being like, that was the best combat that I've had in D&D because
Oh, that's
of
awesome.
how much thinking was required for that. And like, this is such a small detail, but like the fact that like there are windows anywhere, it's like, oh great, okay, perfect. I have an escape. I love that as a character. Like before in like different campaigns where I would have played, it would have been like, is there a window in this house? I don't have to ask that. I can be like, there
Yeah.
is a window in this house.
You can
That's
see it,
getting
yeah.
busted out.
Yeah.
That is getting busted out. That is an escape route.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
with a map like this and Barry, I know that I don't. This is coming from someone who's never been to the Netherlands, but I just have this image of like windmills in your backyard, like just all over the place.
It's all true.
And I hope that I hope that I did it justice because I have obviously never seen a windmill in real life, at least one like this. So I found myself looking at diagrams, like thinking to myself, okay, well, how does the wind sail mechanic work? Like, what are the mechanics involved? How does the main mast section connect, inside? And how does it, how do the gears work? And I find myself like looking at actual blueprints of windmills, trying to piece together how they actually work mechanically.
Well, and looking at
Right.
like there are details in there because obviously it's a fantasy map. So I'm not like gonna be like, hey, there's like a little gear missing over here. Like I don't pretend to be an engineer that knows windmills that on that level.
Right.
But looking at the maps, there are details in here that shows that you've put that much thought into it. And where I noticed that is if you look at the top floor, for example, where like the actual windmill blades are coming into the windmill itself. You see like the gearbox over there where it like sort of like hits the central pylon where it like starts to like interconnect so it can turn. The way you constructed that looks exactly the way like it looks in real. Plus you have the side beams going outside of the tower again and then connecting onto the sides. That is totally a thing. That is there. And because if you need to push it into the wind, there is like a construction outside that you can like use a very big like rotator and that connects to the wooden beams that go up to actually allow you to turn the windmill into the wind. It's there.
Yeah.
I could like so that's a level of detail that no one else has.
I had no idea that was even a thing until I started looking at and again, you asked earlier about my map making process. That's the first thing is research and development. I very rarely just start making a map. I'm going to go and research and look at real world pictures of windmills and look at diagrams and look at blueprints and try to understand how they work mechanically so that I can capture those details into a map, the graveyard map that I just did for the Lunch Break Heroes adventure. Sure, yeah, I could do a grassy field and put a bunch of headstones there, but instead it's like, no, I'm going to look at real world graveyards. I want to see what mausoleums look like. I want to see what obelisks look like and how different graves and how they arrange the groundskeeping and how the pathways through the grave. I have a folder I call it Inspiration. And I'll probably save about a dozen plus images from fantasy art to real world inspiration. Then I just look at those reference images to try to capture, what I'm trying to build.
Yeah, because there's always when you look at real life, there's always like logic to it that you don't see when you just casually look at it. But when you're researching it, there's always logic to it. Like the way that the grades are laid out, how many are in a row, or whatever. There's logic to it. And applying that to a fantasy map makes it realistic.
That's also part. You have the R&D phase, and then the next phase would be the blueprint phase, right? How am I going to take what I'm seeing here, but also make this into a practical battle map that a DM could run? How do I align this to the grid? How do I make sure that my doorway isn't in some like half grid? Circular maps are a little challenging because you're going to have like fractions of a grid to put that in. But I do try to keep it very practical and aligned to the grid so that the DM can run it very easily.
The one last thing that I want to point out about this map from myself is it's 2D, but that shadow, it's 3D. Like, I'm looking at this and I'm not seeing the sectioned off parts. I'm seeing like the windmill. I'm imagining it. It's like, I really, really love the level that it goes to.
Thank you. That was quite challenging. And like now I've learned how to use, this was actually like shadow texture that I just painted on the ground. Now I'm actually learning how to use the pathing. There's a tool called the pathing tool. So, and you'll see this when you see Castle Ravenloft. You're going to see like my shadows. My shadow game has just upped because I'm learning how to use the pathing tool. I've also learned how to do things like, because each asset has a shadow option that I now never use. Because, for instance, I'll take those trees and I'll use the isometric trees that are the same, which give you that kind of elongated shadow, but a much more realistic shadow, which is not present on this map, but my more recent maps have that. And I remember the description in the book is an onion dome, which is very Eastern European, right?
It is.
You'll see that on a lot of Eastern European architecture, the onion domes. What is the Moscow? Is it St. Peter's?
St. Peter's Square, like the ones that the Basilica uses the same thing, just elongated. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. Very much that onion top. Well, there's no asset for an onion top, and I tried my best to do that on the roof level map, but I was like, you know what? Where I can really showcase the onion dome is on the shadow.
Yeah.
And that's what I tried to do here, was that kind of pointed onion dome with the windmills, the wind sails coming out.
Yeah, you did an absolutely amazing job on this one.
Another fun fact on when I do map making is with this one specifically, I always listen to like fantasy music, but I found a windmill ambient soundtrack which had the creaking wood, this going on, and I had like the distant laughter of like a witch laughing in the distance, and I'll listen to that, and I'll listen to creepy music because it really kind of helps get me in that headspace to make them.
I can imagine.
Creates the mood.
Yeah.
Oh. All right. Next up, we were just talking about it, but the interactive Tome of Strahd is, of course, a thing that you've been making maps for as well, and I wanted to include that for various reasons. One, it is like, the color contrast. You can, at least to me, you can very easily see this here. But I was so happy when you introduced this to me, because I was we were talking about this, and I told you, what I wanted to do, because the book is so boring. Like, the book asset itself is just like, it's just a story.
I hate it.
It's like
one page.
Yeah, and I just, like, as a DM, I'm probably gonna have to read it to them or hand it out as a handout, which is just so like it defeats the purpose of finding like the Diary of Strahd. And I was like, you know what I'm gonna do?
Diary, yeah,
it needs to be cool and creepy, and like everything needs to be in there. And I was like, so what I want to do, and this is what I was talking to you about, Andy. I said, what I want to do is, when I open up the book, that I sort of like get sucked into the book, and then they experience a couple of these things like as if they are there. And you were like, oh yeah, that exists. That's the interactive Tome of Strahd. I was like, you're bullshitting me.
So this was written by the I hope I don't butcher his name, the Assiduous, I think it's Assiduous Adventurer.
Yeah.
And is one of the platinum sellers on the DM's Guild. And I for me, this should just be canon. This should any Curse of Strahd DM that runs Curse of Strahd should include the interactive Tome of Strahd. I think it's like $20 on the DM's Guild, and it's worth every penny. It does not come with maps. I do want to give that disclosure, because I saw that a lot of people on the Curse of Strahd sub were like, we need maps for interactive Tome of Strahd. I'm like, okay, I'll give it a go. And I had already bought it a while back, and I had to read through. And there's like 12 chapters plus an epilogue and a prologue.
So you still got a way to go, Anne.
Oh, I'm going to start incorporating notes into them as well. That's I want you to know that.
But this was
it's incredible.
This was chapter 1, and I remember because I just watched this where you outlined and you were telling them like, well, there's different options. We could go to the village, we could storm the castle, where we can go in the back, the backwoods, and I'm like, plus the tent, and I'm like, well, players need those options. So how can I do this where a DM can try to run? Because in my head, I'm like, players are going to choose different. My own players, half of them went up the hill toward the castle, the other half went into the village, and it was easy for me to have them kind of on one map.
And that was the thing, because when I was reading this as well, I was so happy that you set it up like this, because I was expecting them, and they were actually setting it up to each go with one of the generals. When I told them, like, you don't have to, right? Like they decided to stick together, and I think for the better with a small party. But they were, you guys were getting ready to actually go with a general each, so I would have needed all 3 of them at the same time. Having 3 different images wasn't going to cut it in Foundry, and this was perfect for it.
Yeah, because then it becomes this weird thing. Even Roll20, it's like, okay, well, if I have different map pages set up, it's like, okay, well, half of you guys are going to see a blank page for a while. Just hang tight while I do the map for the other players who can see, and then bouncing back and forth is a little challenging when you're doing virtual table. So, yeah, I hoped that this was a little easy to run. Because when I was reading it, I thought to myself, players are going to be all over this. Like, they're not all going to go together. They're going to split up.
Yeah, I absolutely
I think
love
if
this
we
one.
had split up as well, if we had to see it from that perspective, because we only saw the burning village, we didn't see kind of anything else. I think if we had split up, it would add to sort of the dreamy effect of it, of like, oh, this isn't like happening actually within the world, but you're sucked in there because of the like misty bits. I think if we had seen that, that would have added to that vibe. It's really good.
Yeah. The other thing that I remember kind of that was a little challenging about making this particular map was the what do they call the war table? And in the description, it's not just a parchment map of the land of Barovia. It is a 3D carved woodscape with the. So if you actually look at that war table, you'll notice that I tried to capture the same exact mountain range patterns of Barovia, like as a 3D model on that war table.
Yeah, I saw that. Like
with little shields. Yeah.
For the picture we have right now, the tent is closed, but there is a picture with the tent open. And like the amount of detail on that map is insane.
Yeah, and this was also the lower left forest map. I really started to get more into doing things like ground cover, the kind of thick grass on the ground, the underbrush of the forest. I started to incorporate more of that stuff, and you see that more prominently in my more recent like forest maps. It's not just like here's a tree, here's a bush underneath the tree, and maybe a couple rocks. You'll start to see more ground cover.
Yeah, it's a forest that's alive, and looking at this in contrast to like the Barovia forest maps, again, it might be a subtle difference, but the amount of color in this, in contrast to the current Barovia maps, is noticeable. Like this looks like it's alive, and the other maps look like they are almost not.
Yeah, because I'll mute when I'm done with the map. I will apply a series of filters, not just filters, but each individual asset. I generally, if it's a Barovian map, I'll go through. So not only will I place, for example, the tent assets that you see on there. I think these ones I just placed as is, but typically I'll go through and I'll place an asset and I'll manually go and adjust the saturation down to about 60% on each asset to really give it that kind of desaturated, to try to strip the color away from it, and then I apply filters as well at the end. Because I want to decolor the map to make it look dreary and moody.
So speaking of color, and that will bring us to the final map. As I said earlier, where you actually apply color, that will actually make it completely vivid and for a reason, because when it needs to be vivid, it should be. And this is the map that obviously I had to include because it's a very special map for us, but also for you, and
I think I know which one.
You already know which one it's going to be, right? Like, there's only one very vivid map. That means a lot to you. I mean, this shouldn't be a surprise, right? So this is the Sanguine Rose, and the Sanguine Rose is a very, very cool map for a lot of reasons, but the most important one being the fact that this is your homebrew. You made this.
Yes. This was so fun to work on, and I felt, okay, so I don't know how I don't know how PG we need to make your stream.
Go right. Okay, feel free.
We're good.
Okay, good. So I felt like there should be a brothel in Barovia, and not just to get perved out with it, right? But I actually, because again, I overthink when I do my DM prep, and I think to myself, okay, what is sex like in Barovia? And I know that sounds kind of weird, but we talk about the mistborn children, and I like to think to myself, okay, if I were a Barovian villager living under the heel of Strahd von Zarovich, right? What does sex look like in Barovia? What does intimate relationships look like? Are we, as a family, as we talk about having children, are we going to have children? Are we going to bring children into this world? I imagine there's probably a lot of couples who are like, we're not going to procreate. And it's not exactly like there's contraceptives. I can't go and buy birth control in Barovia, right? So the best birth control is just not having sex. And I feel like that is a almost rebellious act against Strahd. Either fear of having a misborn child or almost rebelling against not procreating, because why would we want to bring children into this dark, dangerous world? And I feel like some couples are like, let's have a lot of sex, let's have a lot of babies, so that we hopefully, if we have 8 kids, maybe 2 of them will survive long enough to carry on the family name.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like that has to be an issue in Barovia. That has to be a problem, and I think that right there is a recipe for a very lucrative brothel business.
Absolutely. Yeah. Plus, of course, the fact that there is a major city and if you read in the book, the only real virtue that they speak of in Barovia that is commonly shared is just wine. That's like the only thing. But next to that, they say everyone in Barovia is human, except for the ones that come in from the outside. But everyone is human. Combine those two facts, and you're missing things there. These people are human at the end of the day. They have their urges and their vices.
You go to the Blue Water Tavern, you get ripped on some Red Dragon Crush, and the next thing you know, you're going to the brothel. And
so it's such a logical addition, yeah.
Yeah, so it's funny because I added a brothel. I had a bit of a story arc that I did with my players, and this is again 100% homebrew in my game. I added a Muriel Mardukov, which was one of the Mardukov characters. And I went completely off the rails with that. And in fact, my wife's character has a bit of a romance going on with Muriel. And the other character that I wanted to really, and I don't know, I want to be very careful not to spoil some things, but my Ernst Larnack in my game, I thought he was a very underrated character in the book, because in the module, it's like, oh, he works for Fiona Wachter. He's her spy, and that's kind of it. And you're like,
and that's it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, why? Like, what is he? What motivates him? And I loved the idea of making him very much like Littlefinger from Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
I was very inspired by Littlefinger.
That is such the vibe.
Right?
I wanted him to be the guy behind the scenes. Like, he runs a brothel. He's in everyone's business. He knows everyone's dirt. He has no interest in being in charge of anything. He likes being behind the scenes. He likes being that kind of puppet master.
Yeah.
And that's what I wanted to encompass here. And in fact, if you look at his office in the upper left-hand corner, the wall to the south, I was very inspired by the movie Devil's Advocate.
I knew that was it. I knew it.
With Keanu Reeves, Charlize Theron, one of my favorite movies. And that very last scene at the end, when that wall of people just starts coming to life and writhing and squirming on the wall, I'm like, that has to be an Ernst. That's an Ernst thing.
Let me just zoom in on that, because that deserves a little extra attention. So what he's talking about is it's the office in the top left corner, and then the south side of that particular room has like, you know, all these like bodies piled up in a big, like, you know, stone kind of thing.
Like a giant marble stone mosaic, almost an orgy of like a stone carved orgy on the wall.
Yeah.
God.
Yeah, just people reaching, and it's almost as fair. It had a very biblical Lucifer kind of feel to it that I wanted to capture in this almost undertone of like, who is Ernst? Like, what is this guy? What is he up to? You know, can we trust him? Is he just a businessman? This was a lot of fun. So anyway, you know, I added that brothel, and it kind of became its own thing. I didn't originally make Ernst. I kind of had a bit of a backstory. I didn't know how much he was going to come into play in my campaign. And one of my players, talked with Muriel. She charmed her, got like some secrets out of her, and discussed those secrets openly in the main room. And Ernst was listening, but it was my wife's character who knows Thieves' Cant and another one of my players in the group who knows Thieves' Cant. So they were kind of having this Thieves' Cant discussion. And as they were leaving, Ernst said goodbye to them in Thieves' Cant. And it was that, oh shit kind of moment. Like, he just heard everything that we said, because he also is in the underbelly of Valaki. And so that just kind of spiraled, and it inspired me to create this homebrew. And it was also the first adventure that I wrote.
And I loved, like, when I looked at the document that you added in with this for the DMs, of course. You preface that with like, hey, so this is basically just me trying to organize what I've had in notes so far, so good luck. And the document itself is actually pretty structured, but like the way you started that was really, really endearing.
It was like, I've never written an adventure, and I will say my hat is off to all content creators and adventure writers out there, because making the maps is one thing, but writing the adventure and writing it in a way that's organized and structured,
and that it makes sense to others.
Work, yeah, it is a lot of work. I absolutely bit off more than I could chew with that adventure, and afterwards, I think I wrote 2 total. I have another one I wrote for Perez for something that I was inspired by, but it is a ton of work to write adventures.
But you did like so well, because that document really helped me like put this place on the map. My only thing was like, I want to have a map also for Larnic publication, so that is something that I just quickly threw together as an entrance to this.
It's it's definitely on my to-do list. I want to create an Alleyways of Valaki map, but I ended up kind of moving. So I wanted to cover all the core locations first for those DMs who were just like writing Curse of Strahd out of the book. So I do plan on coming back and creating the Larnic publications.
Wonderful. Because like, other than that, like, your preparation for this map was just like out of this world, and it created one of the most fun episodes that we've had. Like, we have a couple of very memorable. Yeah, we have a couple of very memorable moments in our campaign, but like this one,
and John was cracking me up throughout.
John in the bathhouse. Oh,
yeah, John in the bathhouse. I had a character named Drogo who was he was Drogo, who was very much like Rogo from. Oh, was it the other way around? Drogo from Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
My NPC was named Rogo, and he was this big, beefy, Jason Momoa looking guy who just said very few words. And one of my players in our group absolutely loves him. She went and got some services rendered by Rogo, and she, to this day, she's like, we should go back to Valaki and visit Rogo.
Yeah, honestly, I do hope, and obviously I'm not trying to point you at anything, but I do hope that the characters will, like in my campaign, go back to the Sanguine Rose, because this story, like, I love the interaction we've had already, but like, this map deserves another like showcase in our show, because there's so much more that we could do here, and it's.
Don't worry, I don't trust Fiona Factor as far as I can throw her. This seems like a prime location for information. No, don't you worry, we'll be back.
I also loved how when you ran it, it was that front section. You guys are very like, I don't know what this is. It's stone. It's cold and it's unfeeling. And I wanted that because if you're not sure where you're at, I wanted you to feel like we shouldn't be here. And it's almost a deterrent for people who are like, So I think to myself like real world kind of seedy locations. You're like, oh, I don't know. That you move the curtain back. So I DJ'd at a lot of goth clubs, right?
Yeah.
In my early 20s, that was my thing was goth clubs. And you'll go to some building and you're like, this is weird. This feels wrong. And you go and you pay the really grumpy guy at the door, and there's like a black velvet curtain, and you move it aside, and it's like, wow, we're in a completely different room. Like,
Yeah.
this is really cool, and there's vibes in here, and there's black velvet furniture, and you got the mood. And that's what I wanted to capture here, was once you push apart that red velvet curtain, you were in a different place.
And that vibe was totally there. Like, I loved the moment where, like, on the side in that like dark place on the southeastern part of this map, when they come in and they have to drop off their weapons, that part I saw with all three of them. Like, I'm not sure, like, we're gonna have to, but they were so like, I really feel queasy about this. And then the curtains parted, and John was taken to the bathhouse. Marissa's like, oh, this one's mine.
I mean, Ernst isn't an absolute monster, right? He's like, no, I want to protect my employees, and I'm not going to have a bunch of adventurers strapped with daggers and knives and swords going into a room unoccupied with one of my employees. Like, both the men and women alike that work in my facility need to have a level of protection.
Yeah, and another reason why I love this map is I like having places where I can put NPCs that don't really belong there, put them in there to give a little extra hook of like something so they can talk about that. What I did here is I put Lungari here because they were still on the hunt for really Lungari, and I was like, Lungari's a guy, he's got urges. Yeah. So they're gonna run into him.
What will attest to this though is this is so interesting that like the main guy we've been chasing for a while, he is second to the fact that we are in a brothel. This was far too interesting a location to like get up and leave to go chase him.
Yeah, because he was out the door already when you guys noticed. Like, that was Lungari.
Yeah.
Carla was like, you can probably chase him.
It was also fun, like, if you look at each individual room too, I tried to add like a little bit of a theme, because everyone's gonna have kind of different themes, right? Yeah, you have some rooms that are like, oh, more like standard, this basic room for basic services, and there's other like the one in the let me move my Discord up, the upper right room. You walk in there and it's like, okay, here's the spiked paddle, here's the bondage straps, right? Like, each room kind of tells its own little story about the individual who works there. Yeah.
So as with all your other maps, like the amount of detail is crazy over here. But I love the fact that this is your very own map. Like, this is your story, and it paints the picture perfectly. Like, the vividness of the color and everything. You can just show this map to anyone, being like, okay, imagine a roleplay scenario. This is your map. What's this? It's a brothel. You don't even have to tell the story. You can see that, and like, that is a quality. Like, that's a good map. And you can see what this is.
I want to word this very carefully because I don't want to spoil anything for Anne. But there is a second map in this series variant, and I don't know if you've seen it. You have? Okay. Good. Yeah. So I tried to encapsulate the same look and feel into that second map.
Yep.
I hope we get to see it.
It's one of the reasons why I really hope they will get back and like get a little bit more invested in this place, because God, I really want to do that.
One of the things I do love about this map as well, like, is the color. I think you mentioned the vividness, because it does. It when everything else is so like demure and like just so bleak and so bland, this is so colorful and so light that it immediately triggers the like, oh, this is a place that's like might actually be good in this area, even though traditionally you would think of a brothel and maybe think like, oh, nefarious activities might happen in here, but like when you're looking at this, you're like, you can't deny that they've got nothing else going on.
Yeah, and that's a good joy. Outside of the Vistani, it should feel vibrant with lots of silks, like, and I want players to wonder, like, okay, well, there's a bowl of strawberries here. Where are they getting strawberries? Like, where is the source of where are they getting fine silks made? Like, where is this stuff coming from?
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? Plus, there's a couple of people walking around in this map that are like part of your canon, like your story, which almost advocate the sense of like, there's a lot wrong in this world. Let us take care of you. So, like, at least you have like a bit of pleasure. And they have their own reasons for that, but still, like, they do bring it as a positive thing, and there's something to be said for that. In a world like Barovia, is it really such a bad thing to have a brothel? Like, you know, with all the bad shit that's happening in that world, this is sort of like a last comfort that is out there, other than the wine, which is why it makes total sense.
Yeah, like you've got three options really. You've got the brothel, the wine, or the children pies, and this seems like the most ethical of all of them.
This seems like the lesser of the evils. I also very much loved role playing Anaconda, the kind of receptionist, as you will, because, you know, it was just great because I just got to dog on my players. As soon as they walked in, Anaconda was like, okay, so that'll be, you know, 4 baths because I could smell you coming in. Like, girl, what is up with that hair? You know, like, your hair is so nasty. Like, we need to get that washed immediately. Okay, I'm going to place an order of lavender. Look at those disgusting nails. Okay, let's get, you know, and my players are just sitting there, like, being berated by Anaconda because and when was the last time my players actually had a shower? They have to be rank at this point. Prestidigitation can only do so much.
That is actually a good point. I have another campaign where, like, that one of the characters uses prestidigitation for almost everything because, like, he is really, like, you know, self-conscious about smelling good. But you make a very valid point. Like, you can only do it so many times until it just doesn't work.
Yeah, my wife and I have gone camping, and we can usually last about 2 days before we're like, yeah, we're gonna go book a room in a motel so we can take a shower because we can't anymore. We feel so gross and grimy.
I love that as a little mechanic that people remember occasionally. Like, Perla nearly dying to, like, a mimic broom for a bit of soap was really funny.
Yeah, exactly.
Or a little, like, teaser for Icefire Peak, which is why you should all follow us on Instagram and all that kind of stuff. Like, the amount that prestidigitation was used just for, like, the bullshit of make me look more sparkly, make me look better, was so high. It's such a good spell. Yeah.
Prestidigitation in
our group,
in the Dragon of Icefire Peak. Yeah, and in the Dragon of Icefire Peak, prestidigitation was just used as a cape of billowing, basically. It's just like, they enter the building and it was just like prestidigitation to make her hair be like, whew. That was all.
Yeah. Anytime Marissa got in dirt, she was like, no. Prestidigitation, please.
Yeah, please. Because, I mean, anyone who's gone camping or has stayed out in the wilderness for more than a day will absolutely understand what it must feel like to be grimy. And this is a D&D world where you're covered in monster guts all the time. You're sleeping on the ground. You know, it's very rare that you get to go and actually have a nice bath. And then especially an upscale, nice establishment like the Sanguine Rose, you know? Let's get you a nice lavender bath and get you smelling good again.
Yeah.
And the bath provided such a funny, like, the most iconic moment, I think. It was... It's again, it's all small details because of course they'd have a place to wash themselves in a brothel.
Yeah.
It was just John's reaction to that was just great. It was like, you know, but wait, this is supposed to get me clean, but there's 2 girls in there. Like, how's that? Like, sharing bath water?
It was cracking me up. I was so loving that whole scene. In my campaign, Rogo he's a man of few words. You know, he told our wizard character Alistine, you know, he's just like, okay, take off clothes, and she's just like, sit, you know, and she's like, okay, you know, it was great, and all my other players were all dying. It was a really entertaining moment.
Love it. All right, so that's all the maps we have for you, but we also, to wrap everything up, we also have a little pop quiz for you.
Oh boy.
Yeah, so I mentioned this very briefly because I wanted this to be a little bit of a surprise, of course. So what we did is I created 10 questions for you. Or 9 technically, about a bit about the Gilded Flask and a bit about Dungeons and Dragons in general, to just test how well your knowledge is of all of that. Obviously, you're not going to be sent to the bowels of hell if you get it wrong, or do you? But
not
yet. So, are you ready to see how far you'll get with that?
Yeah, let's do it.
Fun. All right, let me just grab it over here.
I feel like I need a little bit of whiskey, but it's all packed up in the move.
All right, so let's have a look. So here's a few questions to test your knowledge of D&D and the Gilded Flask. Are you ready? A, yeah, or B, also yeah?
Let's do it. Okay, yeah. Let's do B. Also, yeah.
Yeah, that's a valid choice right there.
Smart choice. Smart
Yeah.
choice. Mhm.
All right. So one of our characters has an ASMR cleric as a character, and her name is Cassariel. A. Silverwing, B. Silverbrow, C. Goldilocks, or D. Lilacheart.
Oh boy. Okay, I know it's not C, and I know it's not D because I do love my Carla Lilicart. It just rolls off the tongue so well.
Right?
It works.
I want to say A, Silverwing.
Ooh, close, but nope.
Silverbrow.
Marissa
still
will
gonna
be
go
at
for
Yeah,
your
Silverwing.
house.
oh
T-minus
boy.
10.
Marissa's gonna be so pissed at me. Because I knew it was Silver something, and I'm like, oh, it's Silver something. I just couldn't remember which.
All good. So you get half of it right, right? Okay, so the party has found out that an old acquaintance of them is also in Barovia. What is his name? Is it A. Professor
is,
Paddington? Oh,
It
you
is
already know?
C. Yes, C.
Dr. Daskalu. Yes, it is indeed.
Yes.
It
I'm
is where
very
we are right
excited
now.
to see that story unfold. Very
Yeah.
excited.
So nervous. I'm so
You
nervous.
sent me Barry a bit of your like voice work that you
Uh-huh.
did for him, and I loved it. It was so good.
So we have because Dr. Daskalu comes from a kind of a prequel, right? That we played where Anne was DMing, and I was a
My
player.
first time since the pandemic as well. I was like, that's, yeah.
And you did amazing, like honestly. So Dr. Daskalu was my character, and it is on our YouTube. It is on our YouTube. So if you want to watch it, yeah, it is. So
I have
we
not
uploaded
watched
it
it yet. I very much want to see that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a prelude, and it tells you like why he's an acquaintance of them, and it also tells you like why it's so dangerous that they found him again, because he took
And
something
he's
with him.
dangerous because Papa was the one who was playing him. Barry was the one who was playing him, so we played him as the most evil, conniving. Oh, and you know what feels awful is I feel like I put the like ball on the tee for him to take his golf bat and like club our heads in with it.
Yeah,
It's
I'm not
terrible.
going to spoil what happened, but let's just say that she did something really cool with the campaign. And once we were done, because it's 2 episodes, and at the end of the second episode, it was like, oh yeah, so we're done. Okay, and I said, so did you notice that XYZ? And they all collectively had like, oh
Yeah.
god.
It's that connection. I love it when players become NPCs in future. Like we joke that our wizard character is going to be the next big bad evil gal, I should say, in our next campaign, just because she's burned her fair share of buildings down with her fireballs, and it's
Oh my.
mayhem, and I love it. Yeah. We also started our Curse of Shroud campaign with a former player. He switched players. Or switch classes and characters in our new campaign. But from Lost Mines, we started Curse of Strahd with his former character basically being murdered by Strahd. Like that's how the campaign started. So very much like your Ismark moment, he got murdered, and then when they had a dinner event later, they saw him, the murdered character, come back, and it was very much like, oh boy.
Oh, that's
This
a
is what
great
we're gonna
moment.
have to
Yeah.
do. Yeah.
That's
And of course,
cool.
this is all done with consent of that player. We had talked about it. We're like, this is going to be so diabolical. I love it.
Super important and also so epic.
So, Dr. Daskalu, of course, that is indeed correct. So, next one. There is something that is taking control over Daniel's character, John. What is that? Is that A, his weapon, B, his armor, C, his longing for another visit to the Sanguine Rose, or D, nothing? John is an independent soul who needs no help.
I want to so bad answer with C because I feel like that is the more appropriate answer. But the answer is A, his weapon.
Indeed, his weapon. Yep, his weapon is slowly getting control over John, and he's trying to fight back, but it's that's going to take a little while.
Yeah. And he's such. I love John, his character so much because he's almost innocent in a way. You know, especially I think it was the last episode when he was playing with the Blinsky dolls.
Yeah.
I was like, that's so John. I absolutely can see that.
Yeah, but he got upset that his one like burnt up.
Yeah.
The skeleton that got burnt by people. Yeah.
What was great is that his patron, which by the way, you don't know who his patron is, and I can tell you, of course, after the show if you want to, but you know his patron. So because you're a DM, so you know his patron. It's an in-world character.
I'm curious.
Yeah, there's a very, very fun link that is going to be revealed at some point. But what's great about this, what we noticed is John is now this he's a smart fella, but he also just has things that he doesn't really care about or doesn't look at. So like he sort of like skips that, and the weapon allows him to still be like, that's still important. So it allows him to be more than his normal character, and it's great.
Things like that are really, as a DM, they're great vehicles to help when the party gets a little stumped. So my party has not wanted to part ways with Irina. They're being very protective over her, and she herself is also a great vehicle to help the party when they get stuck, or if they're stuck on a puzzle, or if I feel like they need a little bit of nudging in a non kind of meta way, Irina will be like, well, what about this? Like, if you guys thought of this, and the party will be like, oh, that's a great idea, Irina, and it kind of helps guide the party when you
need something like that. And yeah, especially in larger modules, you'll need that, like, because you don't want to spoil it, but every once in a while, like, if I'm not going to do this, it's going to be 3 episodes of nothing.
Exactly, or without me as the DM going like, you should look at that door, the voice of DM coming down, yeah.
So yep, his weapon, indeed. Next up, we have our good friend Carla. Carla is a reporter for which newspaper? Is that A, the Violet Gazette, B, the Sorcerer's Digest, C, the Waterdeep Post, or D, the Mystical Times?
It is A, the Violet Gazette.
It is indeed.
It absolutely is.
Yes. I absolutely love Carla so much. I love the way your character's name rolls off the tongue. Like, I like saying Carla Lalacart. And I just think it's such a clever, like, what a fun use of the Bard class, being a paranormal investigator. And Barry, I absolutely love how you've taken that and you've given her like the Ouija board. Like, those are some of my favorite scenes when you put the Ouija board on the map and you see the little thing move around. And I just think that's so fun. And so fitting for Curse of Strahd. Yeah, very fitting character.
Oh.
All right, the Violet Gazette. There you go. All right, next up I have some general D&D questions. Would you be able to tell us what creature this picture is? Is this a 3rd edition depiction of a ghoul? Is this a Bodak? Is this a doppelganger? Or is this me before my morning coffee?
There's a right answer here, and it's D.
I think E, me before my morning coffee, is my way to test. But the answer to this is B, a Bodak.
Yes, it is indeed.
And I know that because I think this particular monster is so fun to run and so evil. And my party did encounter a couple Bodaks as well. So.
Yeah, they in my party they've just run into this in Dr. Dasku's house for the first time, and yeah, it's because it's the thing is with singular characters, unless it's like when you see a dragon, like that's something, but a creature like this, they look creepy, but it's ultimately just one guy, right? So how bad can it be?
Yeah,
these are seriously nasty.
They are nasty. One of my not to spoil it, the creature mechanics, but one of my players, the nasty mechanic Barry that you know of, she failed her roll, but she had inspiration. She's like, should I use inspiration? And as a DM, I'm like, I can't tell you, that's on you. And she's like, I'll get to use it. And then she rolled like a nat 20 or something and made it. And in my head, I'm like, you have no idea how lucky you are. Yeah.
Fabulous.
All right, so Bodak, indeed. Next up. What does raw mean? Is that ready and waiting? Is that rules as written? Is that something Gordon Ramsay doesn't seem to like too much? Or is that regular ashen whistle?
I love C. That cracks me up. But the correct answer is going to be B, rules as written.
Yes, indeed it is.
As a DM, we talk about raw all the time. We also talk about RAI, rules as intended.
Yep.
And then there's the stuff that you just throw out the window because you think it's silly and you want to do it different.
Yeah,
it's over.
and that's roughly always how a discussion about rules always goes, right? Like, well, rules as written is like this. Someone piles up on that, like, yeah, but it's like intended like this, and then someone else says, like, you can also just not do that, and
right.
Every discussion goes like that.
A good example is raw rules as written is that the cat stat block does not have night vision, and I think that's absolutely ridiculous. So when my players shapeshift into a cat, because I have 2 druids in my party, they have night vision because it's a cat.
It makes total sense.
Yeah.
Another one that I, as you might have noticed, I almost overuse is the whole rule of cool thing, which it negates a lot of the rules as written, because I respect rules as written as far as I can, but sometimes the vibe of the moment is so much more important than the well actually moment.
So one of my I'll give you a quick little anecdote. In our game, they were fighting some revenants, and they have that paralysis ability. So our wizard's character was lying on the ground, completely paralyzed by this revenant. Well, she through some twists in the game, she is able to. She has some elevated psychic powers now, and she can not physically speak anymore. She cannot say words. She can only communicate telepathically. So because I didn't want to just screw over her wizard character by not being able to cast any verbal component spell, I said, you can now cast verbal components by thinking of the words in your head. Your psychic abilities are as such that you can do that. So she's paralyzed. She goes, can I verbally use Misty Step to teleport above the enemy and basically body slam down onto him? So
That's
teleport
smart.
30 feet above and just come crashing down, even though I'm paralyzed, because I can cast verbal components using my mind. And yeah, technically, according to the rules, you're incapacitated. You can't. I could have been like, well, technically on page 7,
Yeah,
I
no.
said, no, that sounds freaking awesome. Let's do it.
So funny.
Yeah, let's do it. And she did. She Misty stepped above, fell 30 feet down. They both took fall damage, and it was awesome.
I love it.
Oh,
And that is honestly,
fabulous.
and that is what Dungeons and Dragons is about, right? Like when someone comes up with something cool, the last thing you want to do is punish them for it by saying, "Well, you can't because." No, it's collaborative storytelling. Someone comes up with a cool idea. Yeah, let's.
Yeah, or like my wife's character plays a kind of half rogue, half druid. She wanted to do this thing where she like parkoured off the wall to do this thing where she came downward with her sword to try to stab into the shoulder, and I could have been like, well, there's no rule for that. Like, no, give me an athletics check. Let's see how well she did, and if she makes the athletics check, I'll give her advantage on the attack roll. You can use the mechanics in a way to not stifle your player's creativity, but instead to award that. Yeah.
And also, like, what I usually do is I like to put like a dice roll is great for this, of course, and I always like to do like a plus and minus. Like, okay, you can do this. You can choose not to. That is one. Option 2 is you roll your dice, you roll great, you get like an advantage or something like that. Or you roll poorly, so you roll poorly, you just face plant in front of him. Your choice.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you did that. You did that in the death house in the basement. There was, I think it was John wanted to try to do something. But you're like, okay, but if you roll poorly, and you'll outline it, you're like, if you roll poorly, you're gonna fall right in front of this ghoul. So there's high risk, high reward.
Yeah, but it's worth a try. So
yeah, but let's do it. Yeah.
Absolutely love it. So yeah, rules as written indeed. All right, next up, does a melee weapon that is thrown count as a ranged weapon? A, yes, because you throw it. B, no, it's still ruled as melee. C, yes, and you can add your dexterity bonus to it. Or D, only if you have the archery or crossbow expert feat.
Oh, that's such a good question. I'm torn between A and B. I want to say B because it's weird because a thrown weapon you apply your strength still even though it's used as range. Typically, they're very careful with their wording. Typically, if it's ranged, you would use your dexterity stat, but thrown weapons don't use dexterity. So I'm going to say B.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. Yeah. As a matter of fact, when I thought up this question, I was like, "Oh, that's a great question," and I'm gonna have to look up the answer myself because I don't know.
Yeah, it's one of those weird, tricky things. But wow.
Yeah,
I'm
unless
surprised I got it right myself.
Yeah, well, unless it's specifically a ranged weapon, it's exactly what you said. Unless it's specifically a ranged weapon, and you can recognize that by the dexterity modifier rather than strength modifier, then it's ruled differently. And in any other case, it is just a melee weapon. You're just throwing it, but it's still melee.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, because they are very careful with the wording. If they say range, then it's implied that you use your dexterity stat as your modifier.
Absolutely. So you got it right. Perfect.
Oh, I all right. I got my rules lawyer question right.
And then I got one more. This is the final one. A monster is immune to damage from bludgeoning weapons. Does he still take damage from falling? A, no, because he... Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, no. Go ahead. Let's go through because your answers are fine.
It's either no, he'd be resistant to that, or yes, but only half damage due to resistance, or yes, falling is not a weapon, or no, falling never hurt anyone in Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah. So I love the last answer. In fact, I find it a little silly that there's actually a falling cap damage I think it's like 10d6
Yeah.
is the cap that they added, and I take that out completely. In fact, in my session 0, I'm like, there is no cap for falling damage. If you fall 2,000 feet, you're gonna take the equivalent of d6, you're gonna die.
Yeah.
Which is fun in a later fight. Again, I want to be careful with my wording. Which is
know.
fun in a later fight with a flying person on a cliff. That's all I'm going to say. So, but the answer to this is going to be C, yes, because falling is not a weapon. It's not technically bludgeoning.
And that is perfectly...
Fun fact is you can werewolves take falling damage.
They do, yes.
So that's
Thank God. Are there werewolves in Barovia?
I don't know.
I can't imagine.
One of you would slip up.
I can't imagine. I can't imagine there would be any kind of spooky
Supernatural creatures.
No.
I mean, Strahd's just a guy. He's just like that.
He's just a regular guy. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just unlucky. Like as Vistani said, like a curse has befallen our prince. There you go. Like he's just unlucky.
That was my story hook as well. The Vistani brought them to Barovia because they want to save their prince, who has befallen a curse of darkness.
There's actually there's this meme that I saw the other day, which is like hilarious. It's just two vampires knocking on someone's door, being like, we're bringing you the good word of Strahd, and people are like, wait, who? Strahd? And like there's
That's great.
There's like a yes and no that starts, and at the end it's like there's a lot of like misunderstandings about our current faith concerning Lord Strahd. Maybe we come in.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Wow. That is amazing. Have you heard of our good Lord and Savior Strahd von Zarovich? Maybe come in and you're like, I guess, like, oh boy.
Oh God.
So getting back to the question, it is indeed not a weapon. It is still bludgeoning damage technically when you fall, but like falling is not a weapon. So yeah, it's totally.
Yeah, it's not a weapon. See.
So there you go. You only had one wrong and only half of that, so you totally passed the bar over.
I know. So, the one I got wrong is for Marissa's character. She's gonna kill me. I'm sorry, Marissa.
It's gonna haunt you forever.
I know. I just think of her character, like when she gets pissed in game, and I'm like, oh boy, she's pissed. Like, this isn't gonna end well.
I mean, that was already showing, like on the first episode. She was like, so I'm an ASMR cleric, and within like 35 minutes, she was holding a dagger to the throat of the jester.
Mm-hmm.
You're okay.
Yeah, no, she did.
Fine.
I think there was I can't remember specifically. It was in the Blue Water Inn, where I think one of the NPCs was kind of messing with her, and John was already like, like we should get ready for her to do something. And it's when she's calm but seething underneath is when it's the most terrifying.
And Marissa plays that so well. I don't know if you even see her.
She does so good.
The accent is just
literally.
And she doesn't just verbally play. You could see it in her face. You can see the shift. She keeps her poise, but you can see that kind of smoldering underneath. And I'm like, she does it so well.
Her role-playing forte is just like is absolutely perfect.
Yeah.
So you pass with flying colors. Your selection of prizes include a fresh Barovian pie from the Durst Windmill, or an unlabeled green potion from Dr. Dasklew's Manor, or just like a round of applause. Your pick.
Ooh, I want to say a pie because I've heard of the legendary Barovian pie. But my curiosity is going to say the unlabeled green potion.
Oh, well, in that case, you should really watch like the prelude to The Curse of Strahd and see like what it's all about. Yeah,
I will. And for everybody listening and everybody who will be listening, I assume you'll post this up on YouTube.
Yes.
Subscribe to the Gilded Flask. Watch their content because, like I mentioned, I think before this stream went live, you guys are one of the most professional live streams out there. I love the intro video. I love your guys' chemistry. Your characters are fun. Your backstories are amazing. The care and attention, Barry, that you put into running the game and incorporating the backstories is really, for me, it just speaks to me as a DM. So yeah, sign up, subscribe, do all that fun stuff. The Gilded Flask is amazing.
You're too kind, Andy, and the same goes. Yeah, the same goes out to you for like all the maps that Andy is putting out. You can find those on patreon.com/DM_Andy, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
I'll throw the link in chat again.
DM for Dungeon Master _Andy. DM Andy. I have a ton of free maps as well, so I don't want to gatekeep anyone who may not have the financial bandwidth to support on Patreon. You can still go there. You can still find tons of free maps. I also post maps on Reddit as well. You can find me there. And then my wife runs our Instagram page, and she does a phenomenal job putting together some really fun reels. You can watch like my map making process on Instagram, and she does an amazing job. So special shout out to my lovely wife, who's my marketing manager, and who is incredible.
And when this is on YouTube, all those links will be below. You should totally check them out and give so much love. Please. Begging.
All the love. Because content creation is very challenging work, and a lot of us do it on the very limited spare time we have, and it's a labor of love, and we love doing it. But your support in any capacity, whether it's just a nice comment, whether it's an upvote on Reddit, whether it's a thumbs up or a subscribe, every little thing you do, it may not seem like it, because sometimes as a consumer of content, you're like, oh, what's my upvote or what's my thumbs up gonna do? We see it all. It means so much to us. Even just like an awesome comment where you're like, this is great. We read every comment. I can guarantee you that we read them. We take them to heart, and we love them. We love the engagement. So
it means that apparently someone out there loved what we do, and that's what we do it for, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So
wonderful, Andy. I want to thank you, like from all of us. Thank you so much for all of it. Like, thanks for the maps. Thanks for your continued like presence in our chat. Because like when we're streaming, there's a lot of times that you're there. It's so much fun to see you pop up in chat. Thank you for being there.
I watch when I can. Sometimes Saturdays get a little busy, but if I'm home and I'm working on maps on a Saturday, I'm there. I'm watching you guys' live stream on video.
Absolutely amazing. Like, thank you so much for that, and obviously thank you so much for taking the time and actually being in our very first like podcast, PodFlask. I have to say, interview style.
I love it. I love PodFlask. It's so creative. Great job, Anne, on that naming.
Yeah, you were the number one on the list that we really wanted to talk to, because we use your content so extensively, and you're such a cool guy to talk to. So thank you so much for taking the time for that.
Thank you. Really, and I'll share Barry, because I sent you one before, but I'll show you a sneak peek of where I'm at with Castle Ravenloft.
You're the best. I want to see it.
I'm pulling out all the stops for the castle. And for anyone from my Patreon who's listening. I think people ask me, like, when's Castle Ravenloft coming out? September 12th is my slated release date for the first Castle Ravenloft proper. It'll be the exterior, and I hope that you guys will.
Getting close.
That's so exciting.
Yeah. All right. Well, that sums it up for the PodFlask for today. Again, Andy, thank you so much for being here. And everyone in chat, thank you so much. You're welcome. Everyone in chat, thank you so much for being here as well. For those of you on YouTube, thank you so much for watching the PodFlask over here. We should have all the links down below in chat, not in chat, in the description for you guys to go and follow. So that will be the Patreon, that will be our Twitch, that will be all the social medias. We'll include the social medias from Andy as well. And as for us, we hope to see you again next week with the continuation of our rendition of The Curse of Strahd. And with that, I hope to see you guys around.
Thank you so much. We love you.
Bye, everyone.
Cheers.
Bye.